Good morning, Morongo Basin. It's great to see you all here today for MBCA's annual meeting. Everybody down? Almost. Yep. Close to the mic. Great. Good to see you all here today. 2019 marks our organization's, the Morongo Basin Conservation Association's 50th year, a half century in service to desert conservation. MBCA is as relevant today as it was when it began in 1969. Our founders first mobilized to stop an electric transmission corridor planned to cut through the basin. After an 11-year battle, the transmission line was rerouted. The momentum and the success of their grassroots organizing are our legacy and continue to inspire the directors today. One of our founders, Susan Lucky Riley, remembered, and this is a quote, in 1980, the MBCA, working in partnership with the high desert tract owners and speaking for the people of the Morongo Basin, convinced the Energy Commission that the transmission lines should not be taken through the Morongo Basin, but should go south around Joshua Tree National Monument on an existing power corridor north of Palm Springs. Julia Sizek, an anthropology doctoral student at UC Berkeley, was recently in the basin doing research for her dissertation. Our mutual interests in the history of the conservation in the basin overlapped when Susie Lucky Riley's archives of the 29 Palms Historical Society were made available to us this summer. Julia insightfully writes, to a certain extent, the beginning of MBCA opposing transmission lines seems to be only a story of neighbors joining together to protect scenic values of their neighborhood against the schemes of large corporations. But the story of the transmission lines actually shows a much larger tale, how a group of neighbors came to understand the connections between the Morongo Basin and the rest of Southern California, and use these connections to advocate for environmental issues that extend far beyond the basin so many of us call home. So the earliest efforts by MBCA have had ongoing benefit and consequence to the basin. Ruth Riemann, who's the current director, in a recent reflection notes, fighting to send the transmission path along Highway 10 led to BLM's California Conservation Area Plan of 1980, establishing energy production and utility corridors. The plan was critical to stopping Green Path North in 2010, as a path that LADWP chose was not, that path chosen was not a designated path. So MBCA's advocacy for the desert environment and our human communities is based in concerns remarkably similar to our founders: protecting desert landscapes, development done right, and the need to conserve and sustain resources, especially water and electric power. There are others, but the biggest impacts on the landscape have proven to be utility-scale renewables and landfills, both leading to poor air quality and other damaging consequences. To wrap up this quick review of MBCA's early years, again, I quote Julia Sizek, MBCA opposed the solution that many energy generators proposed to dirty the desert to power the city. MBCA works to stay ahead of threats, hopefully chase them off before they take root, with the belief that our work today will benefit the desert in years to come, as MBCA founders' efforts have proven to do. The Desert-Wise Living series, which we know as DWL, was launched by MBCA in 2011 from the spark of an idea generated by Claudia Saul, Ruth Riemann, and Robin Caballi in the 1990s. When the basin was experiencing drought and explosive population growth. The rate of groundwater extraction was unsustainable, and the courts declared the aquifer in overdraft. Claudia, Ruth, and Robin knew that much of the residential water was being directed to the landscape, and they believed that using drought-tolerant native plants in landscapes would promote conservation by mitigating outside water use. They approached MBCA with this concern. An educational program was developed and approved. The DWL series would demonstrate and advocate for the responsible use of water and energy. Now in its 9th year, Desert-Wise Living is supported by all water districts in the basin as well as the Mojave Water Agency and Southern California Edison. The series includes a landscape tour in April, as well as this January program and a fall seminar or workshop on renewable energy and other resource issues impacting basin communities and the surrounding desert. The landscape tour, as many of you know, showcases homes that demonstrate frugal water use can have creative and inspired results. In addition to water use for each site, the tour program now indicates homes that utilize renewable energy. The tour attendance has quadrupled since it began, and it has proven to be financially sustainable. The need for water conservation is obviously more critical than ever. Claudia Saul, who's somewhere in this audience, has proven pivotal in the development and success of DWL. While she is stepping off the MBCA board this year after 9 years of service, we're grateful that Claudia has agreed to stay on the landscape tour committee. In fact, I don't think she would, she's agreed, but she must stay on the landscape. Where is she? She's over. That's not nice. Oh no, we're sincere. It's great. What could we do without her? So many, many thanks, Claudia, for your contributions not only to MBCA, but to the other organizations you serve and your Just Do It approach. The Desert Wise Living series demonstrates how a few thoughtful people can bring to fruition an idea that is worthy, necessary, and valuable to the community, proving again that good ideas can become successful grassroots campaigns. It was developed at a time when in our organization's history when the board was eager to say yes. There was some organizational fatigue from the no position of being against and reacting to perceived threats. Desert-Wise Living set us on a more balanced and positive path with a new vision and focus on community outreach and education. We applied for, and in 2015, MBCA became a 501c3. The date was actually January 26, 2015. So today we are also celebrating our 4th birthday as a tax-deductible nonprofit. The campaigns MBCA has been involved in over the past 50 years will be celebrated in a commemorative book. We will tell our story starting with how that small group of committed people fought and won the battle with the Edison Company and founded this organization that has gone on to fight other battles in defense of the natural desert and the quality of life in our rural communities. These stories are worth telling. We want to honor both those who have contributed as well as provide inspiration and guidance to spur new activism. The book is slated for publication in April. Look for news of its release, and we want to give you all a copy, each a copy. We would like now to acknowledge 3 individuals MBCA has honored as directors emeriti. First, Esther Herbert, who unfortunately is under the weather today and cannot be with us, but she's looking forward to watching the videotape of today's meeting and program. The first MBCA meeting Esther attended as a director, I kid you not, was January 26, 1991, and she continued through 2009, serving 18 years as a director. This very day marks Esther's 28th years with MBCA. She's, of course, continued. Yeah. Good, Esther. Thank you. Another anniversary to celebrate. Director Emeritus DJ Masker is another early director who, along with Esther, is still living in 29 Palms and remains a member. She's also not able to be with us today, but thanks also to DJ. Finally, we want to give a shout out to Director Emeritus Chris Caraher, who is here today. There she is. Her first board meeting was in 1994. She served several terms as president and continued on through 2008. A mere 16 years on the board. There are several other current directors who have served on the board 20 years or nearly that long. Thanks to them and the emeriti directors for your long-standing service. We do have institutional memories at MBCA. While our work is often behind the scenes, tracking issues, researching, and writing comment letters to decision makers, we also work diligently to keep you equipped with information so you can respond as individuals. If you haven't already, please sign up at mbconservation.org to receive MBCA's e-blast, also the occasional more time-sensitive news alerts. The website contains a wealth of information intended to inform the community about what we do and how we do it. It's another reflection of the dedication of our all-volunteer efforts, particularly Director Lorraine Turks. Collectively, we make a difference. It is gratifying to see you at the Remote Video Conference Center in Joshua Tree or in San Bernardino at the Supervisors' Chambers to speak in person to the Board of Supervisors of the Planning Commissioners. Thanks to Paul Smith, our local planning commissioner, who's been so great in representing conservation interests. Paul's here today. The Basin activists have established a reputation for taking a position, speaking their mind, and making substantive comments. Good for us. If we don't always win, it's not because we haven't engaged, and there's satisfaction in that. It's been my honor to serve as MBCA president for the past 5 years. The board of directors is now pleased to announce, as of this meeting, that Steve Bardwell will serve as president, David Fick will continue as VP, Marina West will serve as treasurer, she had been recording secretary, and Lorraine Turk will serve as recording secretary. Thank you to these four for stepping up to lead MBCA into the next half century. Thanks also to the other yay! Thanks also to other directors, Pat Flanagan, Meg Foley, Mike Lipsitz, Ruth Riemann, and Seth Steyer for continuing on as directors. And you are each the best, and together as a team, we are even better. I'm glad 2018 is behind us. It was difficult. How many times did we speak to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commissioners about REES, the Renewable Energy Conservation Element, Policy 4.10, exhorting them not to cite industrial-scale renewable energy in our neighborhoods or in other appropriate locations. I don't want to count how many times we called on you, but you responded in such articulate and passionate ways. The marathon 7.5-hour Planning Commission hearing stands out with their unanimous vote in favor of the original 4.1 language that we had urged them to support. We need to rally again around 4.10, and hopefully for the last time on February 28th. The Board of Supervisors, at long last, have scheduled a special meeting to vote on this policy issue. Please put it on your calendar, February 28th, and show up at the Burke Government Building in Joshua Tree or San Bernardino to remind the supervisors of our position to keep utility-scale renewable energy facilities out of existing community plan and RL-zoned areas. Please also consider signing onto a petition available today. Seth has created this for us. We will deliver this letter and our signatures to the Board of Supervisors to encourage them to vote for the original and community-supported 4.10 policy language. Well, we have a terrific we have a terrific program today. Let's get to it. Our keynote speakers, Dr. David Freeman and Angelina Geletova, have come to us today. Did I say it right? Oh, you're right. David Freeman and Dr. Angela. Okay. Oh, you're the doctor, not him? Oh, wow, it's hard to tell. You're both doctors. Let's just call you both doctors. David came to us today, well, not today, but a few days ago from his home in Washington, D.C., and Angelina traveled from Orange County. We very much appreciate their effort to be here to share their expertise and perspective on the developing landscape of the nation's electric grid. David Freeman, a.k.a. the Green Cowboy, has worked to guide national energy policy with 2 American presidents. Angelina Geletova is an attorney and doctor who serves on the Board of Governors of the California Independent System Operators, CAL-ISO. She also founded the Renewables 100 Energy Policy Institute. Before turning over the mic to them, as questions come to your mind in the course of their keynotes addresses this morning, please jot them down. There are Q&A forms on your seats. and we'll collect them after the presentation for a Q&A period led by MBCA Director Seth Steyer. Let's see. I guess without further ado, I'm honored to introduce David Freeman, who will be followed by Angelina. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me make it clear, it was no sacrifice to leave Washington, D.C. and come up here. I just want the record to be clear. It's my privilege. About 52 years ago, President Lyndon Johnson named me to the august position of coordinating energy policy on a government-wide basis. I was the first person in the federal government to have an energy responsibility. Before that, they just thought of coal and oil and nuclear as being separate things. We used to joke. Our policy back then was to pray for mild weather. I don't know that we're doing much better today. It's 52 years later. I think it's useful to very briefly skim over what's happened in those years. We've always been just a little bit behind Mother Nature. I mean, it took a while for the smog to get bad enough in California so that by 1970s we passed some serious air quality laws. We first thought dilution was the solution to pollution until we found out that the particulate matter that goes up comes back down and forms acid rain. We kind of cured that. But all along, we were building a huge greenhouse in the sky. And nobody really paid any attention to it. You know, we humans and other creatures have lived on this earth of ours for millions of years in harmony with nature. And we started screwing up a little bit when we started burning coal 300 or 400 years ago. But we didn't really get going good until we discovered oil about 100 years ago. And about the same time, learned how to fly an airplane and how to fly. So it was the combination of oil and gas and the T-model Ford and air flight that we started really burning fossil fuels in a big way. And, but all these years, without realizing it, we've been building that greenhouse in the sky. And we're all responsible. And now we're living long enough to we're seeing the beginnings of climate damage actually happening. Now, I'm up here and accepted this invitation because you folks are proven warriors in the fight for the environment. But I'm also here to remind you that your victories, and they've been hard fought, and it's taken a lot of tenacity to win them, but you've been playing defense the whole time. We've all been playing defense. And in any sport, you can't win without an offense. And folks, we don't have an offense. It's not hard to figure out what's going wrong. We have a president that can make that clear to us all by himself. But we have a Democratic Party, and we have environmentalists that are not even proposing the kind of actions that we need to take to win. We don't have a winning strategy. And so I've come here to speak to a group of tested warriors. And there's an old expression that if you have a job to be done, you go to a busy person. And I know everyone here feels like you've got the world on your hands just fighting off the bad guys from coming up here and ruining a beautiful part of this world. But this desert is just as much endangered as downtown LA from climate damage. Perhaps the desert is more fragile and more endangered. And unless we mount an offense, we're not going to win. We're losing. And when I say offense, I'm talking about the principal source of greenhouse gases, which, with all due respect, no one's doing anything about. And I'm talking about cars and trucks and buses and airplanes and railroads, the transportation sector, and heating and keeping warm in the winter with oil and gas. The major source of that greenhouse in the sky that is now to the point where it's catching our forests on fire in California. It can't get much more closer than that. That is being, we're literally pouring oil on that fire every day, primarily as we travel and as we heat our homes and buildings and in industry. And no one is even proposing laws to outlaw it over time. Now, I've run 5 utilities, so I'm not in favor of saying that we want to just turn the lights off immediately. But the truth of the matter is that while all this has been going on, the modern day Edisons have performed greater genius than Thomas. I mean, we've learned how to take the natural power of the sun and the wind delivered free of charge and harness it. We now know how to substitute for all that oil and gas. I mean, my gosh, the General Motors company is advertising electric cars. The Ford F-1 truck is now going to go electric. The technology is there. We know how to run railroads with electricity. We know how to heat homes with heat pumps. The revolution is there technically, and it's just the beginning. I mean, we are witnessing the most fundamental change in society, perhaps ever. It's more fundamental than Whitney's invention of the steam engine. We now have got the inexhaustible, everlasting, completely free energy of Mother Nature that we can harness to continue our high energy civilization if only we will deploy it soon enough before the damage is so great that we all have to live at the North Pole in order to survive. And the thing that bothers me is that we are not even proposing, nobody is even coming up with the kind of actions that we took after Pearl Harbor. We didn't call up the automobile companies and say, would you pretty please make a few tanks and airplanes and not make so many cars? No. We told them to stop making cars altogether. We started rationing gasoline, and we built 100,000 airplanes and a whole bunch of tanks and all, and we were the arsenal of democracy, and we won the war. Now, the threat of climate is a more awesome threat than World War II was, if you believe the scientists. Otherwise, this whole crowd, including me, we're just a bunch of intelligent deniers. Let that sink in. I mean, we can, you can win your, and you are winning, and I am so proud of the fights that y'all have made, and I played a small role in helping out when I killed the Green Line of DWP, but that's not good enough. It's not good enough. We're good on defense. In the meantime, we're pouring oil on the fire. The greenhouse is getting worse and worse. The climate thing is getting, and we have the technology to win with. But we're not even asking our representatives in Congress or in the legislature to pass some laws. I mean, there was a governor of this state called Duke Majan, a Republican, 15, 20 years ago, that passed a law back then that told the car companies they have to make a larger and larger percentage of their cars zero emission each year. And somehow or another we forgot about that law. Well, now we got to do something greater than that. Why? What would happen if the state of California said, give them 10 years, say, by 2030 you can't burn gasoline in California? It sounds dramatic, but if we don't do that, we are giving up on the desert. The climate damage will come here. I mean, we've got to at least be proposing measures that the climatologists tell us are needed to limit the damage. If we're not asking for those kind of measures, you know they won't happen. Leadership is not in Washington, D.C., and it's not in Sacramento. The leadership comes from folks like you guys. It comes from the grassroots. But if you don't ask for it, you're certainly not going to get it. And I understand that you got your hands full fighting off the bad guys. But y'all are pretty good at that. And you can do that with your left hand, whereas you start throwing some touchdown passes with your right hand, because unless we get a positive game going, it's not going to work. Now, the other point that I want to make is that all the time that we've been building that greenhouse, and I've seen it over a long period of time in my own life, life has become more and more convenient for everyone. It's gotten to the point where if I see an ad on TV, it's probably telling me I don't need to have shoes with shoelaces anymore. I don't need to bother to have to tie them. I mean, the kind of convenience advertisement that's going on, the fact is that nowadays we are so far removed from Mother Nature, most of us, not people up here, but in the cities, that we don't even want to get up off the couch to change the channel anymore. I mean, we are unaware of how we have been mesmerized by the idea of convenience. And it's a little inconvenient to buy an electric car right now. Oh my gosh, you might have to stop at a charging station a little bit more often than you stop at the filling station. And people are not willing to do that in order to save the planet. We are not using our brain. We have become so accustomed to a convenient life that without realizing it, we become what I call intelligent deniers of the climate issue. I make this speech to people, they listen to me, they agree with what I say, and then they get in their cars and drive off and go watch TV or do something that's fun. And believe me, I enjoy that life myself. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about me and you. We're all, but unless we snap out of it, unless we recognize that there is no tomorrow. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. There is only the present. And if you don't live in the present, if you don't act in the present, you don't act at all. And the first thing that we need to do, and what we're not doing, is demand of our representatives in the legislature and in the Congress to take the force of law in their hands. Because let me say this is not a problem that anyone in this room can solve by themselves. When it comes to lung disease, you can stop smoking. Then we found out that wasn't good enough because secondhand smoke would kill you. So we had to pass laws to outlaw smoking in the whole building. Well, now, one of you can buy an electric car, but if the person sitting next to you continues to drive a gas guzzler, you're both going to be on the same planet that cooks. So it's not good enough for good guys to do the right thing. We have to pass laws that outlaw it. It's just like it wasn't good enough to persuade people not to smoke. We had to pass laws to outlaw smoking in the building. And so we got to pass laws to outlaw, over time, the burning of fossil fuels, period. Now, it doesn't take a lot of courage for a mayor or a governor to say, I'm for 100% renewable in 2045. I mean, you know, fine. But what are you doing today to make it happen? And we are doing a little bit with the electric power industry, which is used to being regulated and where we have made some progress. That's about 25% of the greenhouse gases. But we need to clean up the electric power use and then substitute that clean electricity for oil and gas in driving cars, running railroads, and in heating. And we're doing almost nothing to make that happen. And it requires the same kind of laws and mandates that we enacted to get the electric power industry to move. I mean, the automobile industry never volunteered to put pollution controls in their cars. It took Ralph Nader to get them to put seat belts in. We have a history in this country of using the force of law to get things done that will benefit society as a whole. That's not socialism. That's just common sense. And yet we're not demanding of our elected public officials those kind of laws in terms of the transportation and the heating sector. I mean, I just spent 3 days ago appearing before the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power trying to talk them out of building new gas-fired power plants in the city of Los Angeles. And there were a few young people from the Sunrise Movement there, but I didn't see any of the old line environmental organizations there protesting. You know, the leadership, as you know good and well, only responds to pressure. And, you know, we have got to enlarge our scope of interest. We've got to recognize that we have a society that Al Gore used the right word. They love their convenience. We've got to shake out of that kind of, I would say, warm victim belt that you wrap around yourself and you feel like you're a victim, and we've had to fight these hard fights all this time and these guys are out to get us. Well, you know, we're pretty strong up here. We've taken care of them. That's just like a star quarterback gets tackled a lot. But unless you learn to get up after you're tackled and throw a touchdown pass, you're not going to win. And that's my message to you. I want to just drive it home. We have got to wake up and realize that we are losing the fight for our lives, and that fighting off the enemy that we see is fine and necessary and laudable and worth congratulations for. But then there's that enemy that we have created, that greenhouse in the sky that we keep pouring more and more fuel to. That's got to stop. And it will only be stopped if the people that really care, like folks in this room, demand of our elected public officials that they pass some laws. When we found out that there was poison, lead in the toys for kids, we didn't put a tax on the lead. We outlawed it. When the DDT was killing the birds, we didn't say that, you know, we ought to increase the cost of DDT. We outlawed it. I mean, this country it has a history of taking decisive action when they see and feel or smell the problem. It was Richard Nixon and the Republicans that made the utilities put scrubbers on their power plants to cut out the particulate matter that was killing people. We are capable of protecting ourselves with the force of law, but we've got to demand it of our public officials. And my message to you folks is get yourself an offense and let's go for it. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, I think I'll stand. All right. Well, thank you so very much. It's always a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Ruth, and thank you, April, and thank you, Claudia, and thank you to all the organizers and the hard work you're doing, because by working together we can make a difference. How about now? Can you hear me now? The mic is on. I have to lean in? Okay, I'll try. Okay, I'll try. So, David didn't mention, but the reason I'm here and focused on energy is actually he was my inspiration in law school. He came and gave a lecture to our energy law class and basically told us that we were all, engaged in futile intellectual exercises unless we focused on stopping to be elitist and trying to do work for the environment and to make sure that we are able to clean up the power system. And I had come from Eastern Europe, wanting to be in the greatest democracy of all, because Chernobyl had scared the living daylights out of all of us as young kids, and we were worried that, your government tells you that something is good for you. Your government hides information from you in terms of pollution and a large explosion happening and telling you, don't eat fruits and vegetables 2 weeks after the fact when you've been out marching on May 1 and radiation rainfall has been falling on top of you as you march, and you're wondering why your skin is peeling and you've got rashes and headaches. And it's all a crazy situation of somehow transboundary pollution has no respect for boundaries and for national barriers. Pollution pollutes the water, it pollutes the air, it pollutes everybody, and in the end, who pays? Nobody paid after Chernobyl. People are still denying what happened. So all of a sudden, you realize that energy, the most capital-intensive industry of all, is responsible for your well-being, and you have very little say in it. So I wanted to make sure that I had some say in it, and that I was able to figure out which way the energy system is moving and to make sure that it's clean and it's environmentally benign for all of us. So I came to study energy law in the United States, and David was the one who said, well, if you want to have any kind of an influence over the power system, you go work for a power utility. And he was the general manager of the New York Power Authority. So of course, instead of going to a law firm, I ended up in the New York Power Authority, working on renewable energy, and then worked at LA, worked as the World Council for Renewable Energy, founded the Renewables 100 Policy Institute, because why talk about it when you can have action? And we founded it in 2007. And our focus was accelerating the transition to renewable energy in all sectors, not just the electricity sector, but the transportation sector and the heating and cooling sector. And we've worked very hard, because back in 2007, even Greenpeace was telling us, you focused on 100%? Don't you think that's extreme? Maybe if you say 50%, that's a little bit more realistic. And it's like, who said let's go 50% to the moon? I mean, either you go 100% or you go home. So we said, no, we're focusing on 100%. We'll make sure that that happens. And we were very happy when SB 100 passed last year. Worked really hard on making that happen. And having been on the ISO, the independent system operator, also helped, because our board and the independent system operator broke from the utilities. And it was the transmission and the grid operators who said, yes, we can do 100%, and we should move forward towards 100%. And we put it in a climate context as well, because we work on an international basis and going to all the conference of the parties and seeing how ineffective governments are in most cases to come to consensus and agreement on what we need to do about climate change. We said, well, you know, we had the coalition of the willing. The coalition of the willing didn't work in terms of transitioning beyond climate change. So why didn't it work? Because federal governments couldn't come to any conclusion. So California stepped up and said, well, let's do the coalition of the willing on a subnational level. So we created the Under 2 MOU, which is let's curb temperature rises to under 2 degrees, because that's what's going to save climate change. And also let's make it equitable to where we're at 2 tons per capita in terms of emissions and in terms of creating an incentive for developing countries to come in under the umbrella, because developing countries have much lower CO2 emissions per capita than we do. So that gave an incentive to Brazil, India, and other countries and regions to come in and join. And now it represents more than 3/4 of global GDP. Subnational governments have signed up, and it's the biggest movement when you go to the conference of the parties. It's the subnationals. Actually, when I was in Paris at the conference, the biggest selfie that people wanted to take was with Al Gore, Governor Jerry Brown, and Schwarzenegger showed up too. He was supportive as well. And you know, we've won the battle. We've won the battle in terms of price. We no longer have to say renewables are more expensive and they're a niche application. No. The price of solar, the price of wind has dropped, and it continues to drop to where now it's cheaper than most alternatives. The issue is, how do we make it available to all of us 24/7? And how do we make sure that an intermittent resource can meet our demands 100%? Investments in renewables have become global. It's predicted that wind energy and solar energy are going to have the largest portion of global investments in how we're moving forward. And I have a slide that breaks the solar even more. Mostly rooftop distributed solar is what's going to be deployed, not as much large-scale centralized power plants, because it makes much more sense to have a modular, scalable resource available where you need it. You don't need to spread it everywhere. So another initiative that we had that I'm very proud of, that mandates, starting in 2020, it's not very well known, as part of Title 24, all new construction in California has to incorporate solar. So it's going to be on-site and available for all of us, and that's 120 new homes going in. Having community solar, having microgrids, having a much more distributed and digitized future is going to be something that all of us can benefit from. Working in the power industry, and Dave will remember that. Initially, when we had the 10% goal, utilities started yelling, oh no, we're never going to be able to run the grid reliably on 10%, it's not going to happen. Well, guess what? It happened with 10%. When California had the 30% goal, there was a pushback again. Oh no, 30%, Armageddon's going to occur. Well, we hit 30% and came out swinging, and it was fine. I was at the ISO when we were trying to debate whether we should go to 50%, and I was pushing for the 100%, and they were like, well, you know, let's go to the 50 because that shows that we're making progress. And I'm like, at least make it 51 to show that you've got momentum moving forward. Governor Brown was like, no, we'll make it 50 so it's balanced. I was like, okay, fine. We'll take 50 as long as there's a pathway to the 100. So we had the 50% goal, and then all of a sudden the ISO started hitting 60 and 70% on the grid with no problem, running on all renewables. There were countries that were hitting 100% and even more because renewables had become ubiquitous. And all of a sudden 100% didn't seem like such a stretch, and we ended up with having the law. But the CAISO, the California ISO, routinely runs on 70% or more renewables on the grid. And if anybody is ever interested, there's an app, because my French colleagues were calling and saying, well, how do we know you have so many renewables, and how can we get access to the data? And there's very little transparency coming out of the energy industry. So I said, fine, let's be transparent about renewables. Let's make an app. And this is only for the renewables. You don't have that information on the fossil side. But there's an app, it's called CAISO Today, and you can see how much renewables are generated every day, what part of the demand they are, how much they cost, and where the contingencies and the stress is on the grid. So that's a really good thing to have. Now, we live in interesting times on the federal level, as all of us know, and every year or so, my institute, the Renewables 100 Policy Institute, likes to have a conference, and we talk about 100% and how we get to the 100%, not only here in California, not only on a national scale, but on an international scale as well. And we've inspired Brazil, and we've inspired Argentina to adopt a lot of the regulations that the ISO has in terms of moving forward to renewables, because those are important countries as well. But the United States doesn't have a goal or a path on how to get to 100% renewable energy. So we called NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and said, hey guys, come on over and tell us if the United States can do 100% renewable energy and how that could happen. Now, NREL is between a rock and a hard place, because they do work for the federal government, and they're very careful about saying things in the context of where our government has come up and said you can't run a reliable grid without fossil energy such as nuclear and coal, and trying to revive the coal industry. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because we really don't need them. They're the most unreliable resources. NREL came up with this, and they said, yes, we can do 100% renewable energy for all of the United States. And these are all the resources. This is how they're distributed geographically. And if we had an integrated national grid, we would be able to achieve that. Geographic diversity and geographic interconnection is important in order to be able to pull from the resources. It would be costly, but long term, it would be higher value and cheaper. And this is something that NREL came up with, which we were very happy to see, and I like showing this slide. Of course, along with basically saying how expensive coal is, and that what we're seeing is with a more integrated grid is the shutting down of fossil fuel, especially coal power plants, because they're just too expensive. So if you want to lose money really fast, invest in a coal power plant. We've got a lot of influences on the electric industry that we need to be working with that impact the regulations that we have. Knowing full well that we do need to move forward towards 100% renewable energy and towards decarbonizing the transportation sector, because, as David said, 43% of our CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. We're joking if we don't address the transportation sector. But luckily, we can power most of the personal vehicles with electricity, or we can power them with hydrogen made out of electricity as well. So why not do that? We've got some influences that we need to be cognizant on. We've got gas storage challenges. You know about the Aliso Canyon, making it even more of an imperative to get off of gas. We've got community retail choice with the CCAs, and the CCAs are a mighty force that's coming forward that's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. We've got the regional collaboration with the energy imbalance market. We've got fossil plant retirements, transmission and distribution system interface, to where a lot of our power now, from a distributed generation point of view, is going to be generated at the site within the built environment. And how does that interact with the larger scale transmission system? It's a good thing. You've got consumer-owned and customer-owned power, and the customer is yielding a lot of power too, no pun intended here. Grid modernization is important. We've got the 100% goal, and of course, we're reaching the 50% goal. Everything needs to work together. We've got energy efficiency goals. We've got renewable energy goals. We've got transportation goals. Now, Edison came up with 7 million vehicles on the road needing to be implemented by 2030. That's a good goal, but how are we going to do it? And of course, in the end, we have AB 32. I mean, even if we argued about what should our objective be, AB 32 always said, we've got to reach 80% below 1990 levels of CO2 emissions by 2040. That's 100% renewable energy and 100% decarbonization of the transportation sector and the building fleet as well. So we need to start transitioning to those very, very fast, because if we align our requirements, that's what needs to happen. Where's the largest growth that we can see in terms of generation? Solar and wind energy. Since 2010 to 2018, we've been able to increase our renewable power generation by 20,000 megawatts. How big is a nuclear power station? That's supposed to be so reliable, something that we can count on all the time, right? So what happened with San Onofre? Radiation leak, 2,200 megawatts offline. switched immediately that we had to make up, and that proved a lot of reliability issues because losing 2,000 24/7 power megawatts in a constrained area was difficult to make up. But we were able to make it up with only 400 megawatts of new generation, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and optimization of the grid. This is the fastest and the cleanest way to move forward because renewable energy, wind and solar specifically, and I'm not talking about geothermal in that mix, doesn't require water resources. It's also fuel-free, so you're never going to be taxed on the fuel. If we have a renewable system, though, and as we transition to a renewable system, there's one operational challenge on the grid that we do see, and this is the infamous duck chart. How many of you have heard about the duck chart? There it is. The duck chart is where we've got a peak at the end of the day when solar tapers off, where we need ramping and very fast generation for about 4 hours. And what are the technologies that can meet that demand? That's the operational challenge that we have. We're seeing a deeper belly. The duck is getting fatter and fatter. It's a well-fed duck, so the more renewables you have, we've got overgeneration in the middle of the day that we don't know what to do with, and sometimes we have to curtail it, sometimes we have to give it away for free. But this is extremely valuable, clean energy that we should be doing something with and not curtailing it or throwing it away. And then in the end of the day, we've got this steep ramp where it's rearing its head and saying, you know, I want more energy because people are coming home and they're switching on their lights and they're starting to go into the evening hours, and we need resources that are able to go for 4 hours, and that's for about 13,000 megawatts every day. To put it in a context, the mandate that the state has for storage, which we think is extremely aggressive, is only 1,000 megawatts. That's not going to allow us to operate the grid if it continues that way. What we're also seeing, though, with the transparency, as I mentioned, you can go onto the app and you can see that we have information on renewable energy and how much energy we generate. We decided we're going to couple this so we can make our French colleagues happy and everybody else, because you'd be surprised how many people go on the website and look at the information that the ISO has in terms of generation and clean energy. And we were able to show in real time the CO2 reductions that are happening as a result of operating more renewables on the grid. And you see the inverted duck there. The more renewables you have, the less CO2 emissions you have as well, which is very, very interesting. What we also see is with the energy imbalance market, as we start to optimize the grid on a geographic level, that CO2 emissions in the region are coming down as well. This was something that we put together where if you're transitioning to 100% renewable energy for our Brazilian friends, because Brazil was very interested. And Brazil, even though it's kind of a developing nation plus, has a very good centralized grid. And they are about 60% hydro-based. And they were wondering, as they transition forward and have more load coming onto their grid, and they want to transition to a more renewable system, what resource they should be integrating with their hydro, because like us, they were suffering through droughts, and they were interested in making sure that they could balance the system. Because if you don't talk to the CAISO, you don't talk to the Germans, you don't know very much about balancing a renewables grid. It's a much more complicated and a much more technology-driven system as opposed to the fossil 24-hour power. But it's exciting for the operators, and the operators love it, and they love technology. So we were able to put this together during the California drought when we had a reduction in our hydro generation. The fact that we had so much solar come online so fast, as I showed you in those critical years, this is what saved the day. And we were able to operate the system reliably because solar came on so fast and was able to generate with the hydro conditions. So, the duck. How are we going to be able to make sure that we put it on a diet and we thin it out so it doesn't get fat during the day with so much overgeneration? And how do we make sure that we flatten the head as well? Again, opportunity for new technology development. This is the Silicon Valley of the world. If we say we need more of a solution and we become technology neutral, what are the technologies that can come and meet that demand? Storage, certainly, with batteries is something we need to be interested in. Flywheels, molten salt, but the big kahuna still, even though we've got all this chemical storage and all these batteries we talk about, is the pumped hydro. Pumped hydro gives us 96% of our large-scale backup power that we need for California, and we're able to do it. Now, that's geographically difficult to site, and we may be able to do one or two more within the state, but again, we need to figure out what technologies are going to be able to fill that pie so that we can get to the 100% renewable energy and integrate a national grid, because right now what we see is the Midwest and the East Coast are integrated through ISOs and grid operators that work through many, many states. The West is still the Wild West. California has a transmission operator, but nobody else. We have 38 separate balancing authorities within the West. It's like the Wild, Wild West. It's pretty crazy and very inefficient because every balancing authority needs to balance supply and demand. You have a lot of excess generation that you don't need and a lot of spinning reserves that are not necessary to maintain reliability. I was asked to also give a brief overview of what the California ISO does. The California ISO is the grid operator of California. We manage the large-scale transmission. We balance supply and demand every 4 seconds, and we operate the market for wholesale electricity and reserve and dispatch the resources. And we also manage new resource interconnections and grid expansions. So we were looking at the market and how inefficient the West was with the 38 separate balancing authorities, like I said over here. And because the ISO had invested a lot in technology and integration, we decided, well, why don't we launch the energy imbalance market, completely voluntary, where people from the separate balancing authorities can choose to come into the energy imbalancing market, totally voluntary. If you have an economic benefit, you can stay in, you can leave at any time you want. We as the board were able to still stay in charge. There didn't need to be a governance change. But because we wanted the West to feel better, because many of the countries had the feeling of California, where they all of a sudden think that we're going to impose our regulations and clean air requirements on them, can feel they have representation. So we have an EIM governing board that reports to us, and they represent that market. And they're able to go forward and join if they want to, purely on an economic basis, nothing else. It has been extremely successful. It's a 5-minute market. It allows for a diverse fleet. It optimizes existing assets. And the new governance model was just the subcommittee with the EIM governing body and completely voluntary. It has allowed for the modernization of the Western grid. You don't need to have a specific interconnection to be able to be a part of the energy imbalance market. We can dispatch you even if you're far away. This is an outdated slide. The benefits now are close to $500 million to all the parties. Any investment you had to make in the energy imbalance market was basically paid back in the first year, and it's been a net benefit since. Proven to be extremely successful. We've got more parties joining in now, and we're very excited about it. But in the process of our success, we've created a monster. Because people have now seen that there's a benefit. It's an environmental benefit, emissions are lower, and it's definitely a huge economic benefit. So now they're saying, well, the energy imbalance market is a 5-minute market. What if you had a 24-hour market? You could capture benefits that are 90% larger than what you're capturing now, and it's true. So they're turning towards SPP, the Southwest Power Pool, and they're turning towards the MISO, who are kind of the Midwest grid operators, and saying, hey, ISO, if you guys can't give us the benefit of full integration, we're going to go and sign up with all those other parties because we see that there's a net benefit, and we want to have it. Now, there's going to be a grid operator in the West. Whether it's us or whether it's headquartered in Arkansas remains to be determined. But several municipal utilities from Colorado have already signed up with SPP saying, we want the benefits. You guys don't have a governance model because you're California-based for us to be able to join full integration, so we're going with SPP. We tried to do full integration where we thought it was a good idea because we could optimize it. California could also be taking the lead. There are like-minded states. Everybody was eager to do it. Technologically, it's possible. Optimization is possible. Guess why it failed? Nobody could agree on the governance. Who would have how many votes? Would California have a higher vote because we're a bigger load and we actually created the market? Montana and Utah and the other states decided, well, they wanted to have just as powerful a vote. Nobody could decide whether they had to be political appointees that were governing this or technical experts that were governing this. Who's going to decide? It became so bogged down into thinking of, are you giving up power? Are you gaining power? Instead of, well, we've done it. It's worked. Why don't we continue that way? So if you look at the top, this is the benefits of the EIM, and if you look at the bottom, this is the benefits of full integration that can be achieved. We said there's got to be a plan B and there's got to be a middle ground that actually works. And it does. We can launch the day-ahead market under the same structure. We can give most of the benefits, and we need to do that. We're planning to launch it next year because we don't want our current EIM members who've now been hooked on the drug of EIM going towards SPP or MISO, but we want them staying with us. And we believe that the services that we can give with Plan B are going to allow them to do that. Again, if we don't focus on this, the risk is MISO or SPP comes in and starts peeling off Western states and integrating them into the East Coast market. That's regional integration. That's kind of the horizontal integration that's important to happen. We've got another interesting play going on, which is the vertical integration, or the customer-owned and the consumer-owned distributed side. Lots of customers are now starting to take control of their energy systems, and why not? If you have rooftop solar, whether you're installing it or if you're buying a new house, as of next year, you're going to have it on your roof, chances are you're going to have an electric vehicle. You're going to have an automated house that's controlled with smart appliances, and why not? So you can respond to grid demands. And there's going to be time of use rates that allow you to focus on how your home responds to the grid conditions. So we're moving from a situation of where centralized fossil power stations had to kind of move forward and generate electricity to meet demand randomly happening from consumers, to a situation of where consumers now need to modify their demand to the available resources, which are the renewable resources, and the time that they're available, because you want people charging their vehicles when you've got excess power, which you're trying to throw away. You want people using energy when you're curtailing power. You don't want them using it during that peak time at the end of the day where the duck demands are very, very high. The electricity grid is evolving. It's no longer a two-way or one-way grid where you're the ratepayer. You aren't even a customer. Forget about being a prosumer or a consumer. You were supposed to buy the kilowatt hour, the price utility gives it to you, and there's no negotiation to that. Now it's a much more evolved grid to where customers can generate their own electricity. They can modify their demand to meet grid signals. They can be a part of a microgrid. Their electric vehicle can be monetized and their home can be monetized. And if we move to a future of where we have programs that allow you as a consumer to be able to monetize your storage in your home, because I as the grid operator can call on you to provide energy during peak demands, and I as the grid operator can direct you to charge your battery when we've got excess energy, you should be compensated for that. Just like power stations are compensated for modulating their energy output and generation. And it becomes interesting because all of a sudden the home that's an asset can become a money generator as well as your car. And if nothing would move us faster to transitioning to the future of electric vehicles, unless we can come up with a system and say, free cars, the car doesn't cost anything, the utility will own the battery as a fuel system because there's a secondary life of that battery. You only use about 20% of the battery in the vehicle for mobile applications. You take that battery out, it still has 80% left in it. You can put it in storage applications or anything else. So if the utility owns the battery and the utility is able to monetize how you charge that battery and you follow grid signals, you could A, have a zero-cost car to begin with. You could be making money every month if you're following grid signals in terms of charging or not charging your car. And if you don't follow the grid signals, we charge you. But if you follow grid signals, it's a minimal cost of operating that car. So have a zero-cost car with almost a zero operation. I think that'll make electric vehicles ubiquitous everywhere, and it'll get us off of gas very quickly, especially if gas goes up and up. So, there's ways to do that. There's opportunities to do that. People are thinking about it. There's also mandates and regulations. London was the first city that last month adopted a goal of basically banning all fossil cars being able to drive into the City of London starting in 2020. Only electric vehicles are going to be allowed. And guess what? Especially the Uber drivers and the pool drivers, because Uber had to pay a large fine in England, they're supposed to finance those cars. So Uber has to come up with a financing scheme for fleet vehicles and for rideshare cars to be all electric in London. And that's going to drive the transition as well, because you're not going to be able to get into the city at all unless you're driving an electric vehicle. This is also demand energy response coming in and complicating the grid. And it's a slide from PG&E that kind of shows you how difficult it is when you're interplaying large-scale transmission and distribution systems. So this is the city of Fresno, and what you see in red, the power lines for the ISO. The ISO does not want to do distribution. We like our large-scale transmission lines, and that's what we're focused on in integrating resources into the large-scale transmission lines. Why? Because distribution system, demand energy response, all that solar, all those batteries are going into this system. This is what the utilities operate. Much more complicated, much more involved in terms of how you're bringing power in and pulling power out of it. And on top of that, the utilities now have to contend with CCAs. And the CCAs were kind of a grassroots movement of deregulation to a certain extent, where cities and regions came along and said, guess what? We want renewable energy faster, it's cheaper, we believe we can do it better than the utility, we don't have the overhead of the investor-owned utility that is so expensive, we can be the city councils and the city governments buying and selling power, and we're able to do it cheaper and more efficiently. And yes, to a large extent, all of our CCAs that have risen throughout California as an organic grassroots movement that people are having a hard time catching up and figuring out how to regulate and what to do with, have more than 2.5 million customer accounts, over 90 million in estimated savings in 2018 alone, while they're going with higher percentages of renewables, typically a 100% goal, which is actually a good thing because that keeps utilities on their toes to a very large extent. And the reason that Southern California Edison came out with their clean power plan was because they're afraid of the CCAs. If the CCAs continue to move forward the way they are, anywhere between 50 and 70% of the utility customer base will be peeled off into a CCA in the next 5 years. Operational challenges as we transition to 50 and 100%. We're not going to be needing 24/7 baseload power. We need very flexible, very reliable storage system to be able to dispatch demand response when it is needed and to be able to manage the ramps. It has to be very quick and it has to respond for, the 20-minute interval, which is very important for us in terms of dispatchability, instantaneously, which is what batteries can do. And then the third category, which is very valuable, is load shifting 2 hours and higher of storage. So those technologies still need to be created. We've had a lot of solar and a lot of new technologies come in online, and you can see the distribution of them, mostly in Southern California and mostly towards the east as well, because this is a good environment to have generation of electricity. But we need to also be sure that we do it on disturbed land and where the load is, and we are not disproportionately focused on large-scale centralized generation only. There's going to be new technologies coming online, such as building integrated, I'm sure of that, with the new mandate, hopefully made in the US, leading to US jobs, and making sure, again, that the generation is where we need it at the load. Because guess what? Most of the behind-the-meter ownership is residential. It's third-party financing of the power system of the future that you and I are paying for as customers because we want it on our rooftops, or because it's mandated. But because we are now the power generation of the future, we should be treated as such and be compensated. for providing those resources and those kilowatt hours when they're needed, especially if we're going to be investing in storage, electric vehicles, and other such technologies that respond to the grid, help the grid. And we're doing it because we're environmentalists and because we want to, but we're also doing it because green is green. And it so happens that it's a resource that allows us to be able to monetize an asset that we have anyway. It's jobs. And it's not just jobs, it's also careers. And we should be looking into careers of the clean energy. A lot of the utility people are opposed to renewable energy because they claim that there's no careers there. Well, yeah, they are. The solar industry employs right now in California more than the 3 investor utilities combined, more people. We need to make sure that that continues, and that's a track for a long-term career, not just a job. Clean tech develops very, very fast. It took 107 years for GM to become a $50 billion company. It took only 12 years for Tesla. Tesla is currently a $50 billion company as well. Compare that to PG&E. PG&E yesterday was worth only $2 billion. So that was not a very good situation. We're a state of innovation. California invests more than China and Europe combined in clean tech. We lead the way. The world looks towards us. Argentina copied our model, and now Argentina is the largest producer of, not the largest, the 3rd largest buyer of wind in the world, just because they copied our program for renewable energy. Now they're looking to us for their distributed generation system. Brazil is looking at us. South Africa is looking at us. We work with the Europeans because the Europeans too are trying to have a whole European integrated grid. And how do we do it, and what's the best way? And like we have our challenges with California and Montana and Utah because we have philosophical differences sometimes, the Europeans have the same problems between Germany and Poland. So we can learn a lot from each other and figure out how we tackle the governance model, which seems to be the hardest nut to crack. But bottom line, a suite of solutions is necessary as we move forward, and they all need to move together in unison. Again, the message is we have the technology. It's not a technological challenge. It's a challenge of a political will, of having a regulatory framework that allows us to look forward, harness an innovation, and bring it to the forefront as a solution. And with 100% in the energy sector, we have that. We need a similar goal for the transportation sector, which is lacking, and we need a similar goal for the building sector. Having solar incorporated into new construction is a great first start, but it should have been zero net energy and even energy plus, which is what people in Switzerland are doing. So we can look to the world for examples, and we can move forward and make it happen. But we need to be looking at storage, demand response, time of use, renewable energy, EIM programs and expanding the EIM, electric vehicles and flexible resources, and making sure that we've got a 20th century grid. And why are we doing that? I mean, I like to bring my children along, not just because it allows me to drive in the carpool lane when they come with me from LA, but because, you know, they've been on the forefront of environmental movement since they were babies. And this is Isabella, my daughter, who's sitting right here. At the climate march in New York, because guess what? We don't have a planet B. And if we want to leave a better world for our kids, we need to be focusing on making sure that plan B is there and that 100% renewable energy is not something that's possible, but something that's a must-have and an accelerated path forward because it can be done. It's not pie in the sky. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Thank you, David and Angelina. So if you have questions, would you pass them to the end of your row? And we'll start a Q&A with these great ideas. And I was just going to, a couple of things while we collect your questions. I wanted to thank and shout out to Brian Hammer. Where's Brian? He's right around here. There he is. Brian has provided he's a GIS mapping guy, engineer, correct, help me, Pat, and he's helped us put together these maps that are highlighting where renewable energy utilities are proposed in Lucerne Valley and Hesperia, is that it, and Newberry Spring? Daggett and Newberry Springs. So these are projects that MBCA and others are tracking and fighting, and those maps are great. So thank you, Brian. Really, really terrific. He's doing that pro bono. And I also wanted to, next door at the High Desert Nature Museum, well, it's right, the entrance is right back there. Well, they've been very helpful to us this morning in setting up, but I also they have a great exhibit. You should really take a minute, while maybe not this afternoon, but when you can. It's called Beauty and the Beast, California Wildflowers and Climate Change. It's beautiful photography of blooming California wildflowers with a focus on how climate change is affecting blooms and plants, and how there will be more and more super blooms, which is kind of good news, bad news, right? But as a result of climate change. But it's a really inspiring, well-done exhibit. So take a chance, the chance when you have a minute to do that. So how are we doing? So Seth, we might give Seth a moment to digest the scope of questions. So Seth was almost not here today because he's a consultant working with the federal government. But he is here today, working tomorrow.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for those really informative talks. We've got a number of really great questions here from the audience. And so the first one is, aside from solar and wind, what is happening with other potential generation possibilities, i.e. thermal, biogeneration, et cetera?
My reaction is kind of interesting. We all have very high IQs, and we're always looking for something better. Isn't it enough that we now know how to harness the sun and the wind, which are the largest sources of everlasting energy on Earth? I'm just curious why the questioner feels that we need to be looking for something else. It seems to me that if we have the superabundant energy supplied to us by the sun and the wind and storage facilities that can save it when it's there and eliminate the duck curve by storage and using it when we need it, that ought to be good enough for a society that's killing itself right now. So I'm going to ask the questioner why the questioner is interested in additional technologies. Why isn't the fact that we've kind of hung the moon? I mean, we've learned how to harness the sun and the wind economically. That is a revolution has taken place. Why do we get a question asking us about something else? That's my question.
And I would just mention that, yes, I mean, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And we have harnessed the sun, and we can do it in a distributed way. And now with wind power being able to come to the West Coast, because we figured out how to be able to have offshore wind in very deep waters. And we weren't able to do that before. I was in Denmark in July, and they had basically said it's easy to put windmills off of the shore on the East Coast and in Europe because you have very shallow waters. Well, now we figured out how to do deep water generation as well, and that would allow us to balance the solar very well because the offshore wind balances with solar very, very nicely. Another resource that I didn't talk to about as much, but through the EIM we have been able to access is the Pacific Northwest Hydro. Hydro is very compatible with solar and wind as well.
But it exists.
And it exists, so optimizing our hydro resources and being able to dispatch them over a larger geographic area will help balance more renewables as well. And then again, being able to harness more pumped hydro or similar to pumped hydro technologies would help us a lot. I just want to say there's a very interesting proposal that came to the ISO that we're going to test that mirrors pumped hydro, which basically takes a hill and then there's a train full of rocks that goes up the hill when you have excess energy and comes down the hill when you need to generate power, mirroring what pumped hydro does without having to build a pumped hydro plant. So human ingenuity is there, and technological solutions are there. We just need to deploy them.
Now, let me just add this thought. We are at the very beginning of the age of renewable energy. And if you want to start thinking the way I think young people think, look at space. We do know how to put in synchronous orbit a solar satellite above the clouds where the sun is 7 times as intense as it is on Earth, and it is continuous. And you don't need storage, and you can take that energy and bring it home by microwave to receiving stations. And if we were able to go that way, and all the nations of the world got their energy from that central source, we might even have peace on this earth. So there is much that modern technology and we can do, but we are in the age of renewable energy now. And also the wind way up high there, if you can put some turbines up there that can hang up there, the wind is steady and almost around the clock. So we're where we need to be, but we're at the very early stages of it. But thank goodness we're there, and we can deploy the technology that we have. I don't mean to sound like a stick in the mug that we're not going to have advances. I think that there are ideas far more exciting than what's been proposed in the past. But we should be excited about the future, but we just got to make it happen and use it, or there will be no future.
Yeah, and then we still have to be cognizant that there's legacy systems and powerful interests that are still at play that we need to be working. Yeah, we also need to be cognizant that there are the legacy systems and powerful interests still at play, and we're going to be dealing with those stranded assets for a while as we transition. So that's not to say that we don't have our work cut out for us.
Okay, thank you so much. This next one is for Angelina, though David, you can feel free to chime in too. Do you think community choice local solar generation model is still an important goal for the Morongo Basin? If so, how can it move forward? If not, what would you recommend?
I think community choice is always a good idea. Community choice actually also started in Europe as well, and it started as a grassroots movement because communities wanted to be able to optimize their resources, own their resources, and dispatch their resources, and felt that they could be more cost-effective than the wires companies and the incumbent utilities, which were just collecting revenue and nothing was coming back to the society. One of the benefits of community choice, which I think is really great, is taking the dividend and reinvesting it back into the community. So if you want to have more resources for the community, have a good CCA program that is able to take those benefits and instead of giving them to shareholders or paying billions of dollars in executive salaries, reinvest it here in the community for the benefit of the community. What Sonoma is doing, Sonoma is buying down electric vehicles. If you're a customer in Sonoma County CCA right now, you can buy an electric vehicle for less than $9,000. Brand new one, and your electric vehicle charging infrastructure is paid for by the CCA and the rates subsidized by the CCA. They're actually taking the idea of not exactly giving a free car, but a very low-cost car with very low-cost operation and giving the benefit to mostly low-income people to begin with that are driving gas guzzlers and clunkers that are polluting the environment disproportionately. So CCAs, I think, are a model that optimizes local generation, optimizes community benefit, and there's no need to be a war between a utility and a CCA. It's a symbiotic relationship. Utilities can't focus on the communities and bringing benefits to the communities as well as a CCA can. And there should be a model that allows CCAs to thrive and grow, and the utilities just become a distribution system operator or a wires company and allow the CCA to come up with the program. So I'm sure that as the utility model of the future evolves, and it has to, because the current business model doesn't accommodate distributed system that are run on renewables as well, that we're going to see that transformation.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just forced to make this comment. If the CCA is subsidizing electric cars to the tune of $20,000 a car, I'll guarantee you they have a limit on the number of cars that they're going to do that. That is not the answer to electrification. That is a very clever come on, and I'm not opposed to it. But let's not
Still
assume.
better than what we had, and it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, but
The perfect is the enemy of the good.
they
It's
don't
never-
have that kind of money. They're going to do that for a few cars, but a few cars Mother Nature is not even going to notice. We need a fundamental solution that requires the automobile companies to stop making gas guzzlers in a few years. It's too late for little tiny things like this to be even, in my view, even praised, because that's fine. They're trying to make themselves look good, and I'm not criticizing them, but that's not the answer to the climate change problem.
But the question was, would it be benefit to the Morongo Basin? And yes, it would, because there's things they can do. And you can buy down solar and other programs as well.
The electric car is inherently a low-cost car if it's mass-produced. And the problem is that it's not going to be mass-produced unless we do like they're doing in London. Now, your example of what London is doing is something that we ought to emulate. We are.
Amsterdam did it too.
All right, well, thank you for those responses. David, this next question is for you and kind of ties into that. So how do we have the technology to win against climate change when the human population explosion and the failure to cut back on our own energy use will require us to cover the entire surface of the planet with solar panels, leaving room for questionably anything else?
That's just not true. That's not factually basis. It will not require us to cover the entire planet with solar panels. That's just not a factual premise. The NREL that Angelina referred to will show you maps that we can take some already disturbed land in this country and rooftops and get more energy than we need to meet the whole energy demand of our country. So let's not scare people by assuming that we don't have a technical answer that requires the entire planet to be covered. It's just not true.
And I wish I had another slide which would have answered this question very well, but I do have a slide that shows how much solar you need to be able to power the whole world, including the 2 billion people that currently have no electricity. So we need to cover 0.7% of the global territory. That is a small speck in the middle of Saudi Arabia, and we need to capture just 2 minutes of the solar irradiation that hits the world every day to be able to power the whole globe for a year. So it's an issue of storage and an issue of distribution. Now, I'm not saying that, we can do it, and certainly the Europeans looked at having high voltage wires from Saudi Arabia into Europe for solar energy and then decided they didn't want to be dependent like they were for oil. But again, we have more than enough surfaces to be able to capture the solar power. That it's a myth that you need to have a lot of land. You don't. And with more efficiencies, we even need smaller territories. So solar is there. It's made out of sand, the most abundant material on the face of this earth. It can be recycled. It's safe. Anybody pretty much can install it, and it allows for it to become a material that is ubiquitous throughout our building industry and everywhere in our neighborhoods. So it can be as small as powering an electric calculator, and it's modular and scalable all the way up to thousands of megawatts. So we've got the resources, we've got the land, we need the political will and the courage to keep going.
Let me just say this. The reason I'm so sensitive to those kind of arguments being knocked down is that plays right into the hands of the oil and gas industry
And nuclear.
and the nuclear industry. Those people are fighting for their lives with a lot of propaganda, and their basic pitch is, what are you going to do when the sun doesn't shine, and it's going to take up too much land, and all those flimsy, false excuses. But so therefore, it is really important that we understand what Angelina said, that it requires a tiny percentage of the land on Earth. The technology is there. And there are a lot of people, a lot of good people, who just do not realize that we have formed almost what I call a revolution in terms of the technology advancement. And the oil and gas people are trying to pretend that we can't do it, or it takes too much land, or this and that. That's part of their propaganda, and we can't give it credence.
Okay, thank you for those responses. This next one is for Angelina, and it has to do with the regional grid. Has the energy savings been monetized for California ratepayers versus the costs of curtailment to make the case that giving some of the California state self-governments away in favor of regional grid, because it will save residents money?
We haven't given any governance away at this stage of the game, and we're not going to give any governance away with the day-ahead market as well. What the regional EIM market has been able to do is avoid a lot of the curtailment that would have happened for renewables and open the market for renewables. What a larger geographic footprint also allows us to do, apart from optimizing the resources that we have, and we've seen the closure of coal-fired power plants to begin with, and now a lot of stress on the gas fleet, because the gas fleet is not competitive as well. It's only needed sometimes for peaking power, is the fact that we can use the time difference to where solar energy located further down east is able to meet our demand in west. So solar energy from New Mexico or Arizona, because of the time difference, can meet our morning peak when we have a peak in the morning. And when we have overgeneration, we can meet their evening peak. So we're able to distribute the renewable energy a lot more efficiently. So an integrated grid on a regional basis or a horizontal basis allows us to capture those benefits, which is what the NREL study showed as well. So yes, there definitely is a benefit. The monetary benefits have come back to California customers. And because the benefits from the EIM market are distributed based on load, California, having the largest load, has the biggest chunk of the benefits as well.
Okay, thank you very much. This next one, is there anything we can improve or make more convenient to improve greenhouse gas emissions to make things like owning an electric car more convenient to the world's population? What can a teenage girl do to raise awareness of our growing climate problem? Can we install solar, renewable energy training facilities, or renewable energy hubs in less developed countries to provide clean energy to places that also need it?
I don't understand the question.
Well, I mean, we lead by example, and a lot of the technological solutions that we have here in California, that we come up with in California, actually embraced around the world. So what we've been able to do here is in terms of optimizing the solar energy, and what we're going to be able to do with the new building standards that require efficiency and solar in all new construction, is to take that experience and go over to third world countries that don't have to make the mistakes of building an integrated, centralized power system. They can go the distributed and digitized model, just like they leapfrog from landlines on the telephone systems to a very distributed, virtually powered cell system on their telephones. So if they can leapfrog technologies and avoid the mistakes that we made and not build a centralized gas fleet or a coal fleet, but go straight to renewables, that's a great thing. And if they can avoid driving a fossil-powered car and go directly to an electric car, heck, even an autonomous car, why not? We can have all those countries, instead of following our bad examples, and all of us are going to have a problem if they follow the fossil route, but have them go to a cleaner, distributed, and much more efficient system right off the get-go and not have to make our mistakes or pay for legacy systems they don't need. So yeah, I think having an educational program, and maybe one of the things we need to do is integrate education into our schools a lot more, because kids get this. Just like they get the internet, they get the virtual power world and the fact that we can have clean transportation and our kids don't have to be driving a fossil car as their first car.
Yeah, but there's another point that needs to be recognized in our American arrogance. We put that greenhouse in the sky, us and Europe, not the developing nations. I mean, the greenhouse gases that are up there that are causing climate damage to the whole world were made in America and made in Europe. They weren't made in Africa, and they really weren't made in China. And the developing nations know that. And so they're looking, it's obvious that it takes some courage for the leadership to move in this new direction. And they want to see some courage out of America, and they want to see some money out of America. They don't need education. They know, they understand science as well as we do. As a matter of fact, we don't come out too well compared to other nations in our knowledge of science. So we need to recognize that we've got to show some leadership in this country if we're going to motivate Africa and Asia and the rest of the world to do what we all need to do, because we're all in the same boat. So it's in our selfish interest, I think, not only to educate, but to show by example what needs to be done. And we need to be sensitive to that concern if we're going to be leaders, or stop using the word leader.
It's true, because that's why when we were looking at the Under 2 MOU, if you look at the per capita emissions of greenhouse gases for the US, we're at 18 tons per capita, and you need to go to 2 tons. If you look at China and Brazil and India, by comparison, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 tons per capita. So on a per capita basis, they are doing a lot better than we are, and that's something that's not very well known. So when we say, India has to play its part, yes, it has to play its part, but if we look at a per capita basis, we have much further to go as Europeans, because the Germans are at 11 tons per capita too. So we talk a good game, but we are the largest polluters, and we still are.
Okay, thank you for that. This next question refers to something you've referenced already, a little bit, I guess. What is the impact of Bill Gates' offer to build nuclear with his $1 billion plus another matching $1 billion? So to broaden that, what might be the role of nuclear power?
Catastrophic. Absolutely catastrophic in every sense. It makes no sense. Nuclear was supposed to be cheap, too cheap to meter. It's the most expensive resource. It is the only industry that has the goal to come and say, hey, we're going to come over here, but guess what? There's going to be 50,000 years of nuclear-related waste that we want you to take responsibility for, because there's no solution of what to do with the waste. We can pollute your aquifers, because inevitably nuclear power and the storage of the waste seeps into the aquifers, no matter what they do and how they store it. And then, guess what? We want the state to indemnify us. If there's ever an accident, there's going to be a cap of $2 billion per accident that is paid. Your homeowner insurance, if you look at it very carefully, excludes nuclear accidents. So if there's a nuclear accident that happens, who pays the bill? Fukushima is currently at $36 billion. The $2 billion is not anywhere near enough. Chernobyl, we're still counting on the damage. Nuclear is not worth it on any level. If you were to fully load the cost of nuclear power kilowatt hours that are generated with the insurance, with the dealing of the waste, I mean, we shut down San Onofre, but billions of dollars are spent every year just guarding the waste that's sitting there. It's also dangerous in terms of nuclear proliferation for the weapons, and nobody wants nuclear weapons as well. It creates the difference between the countries of the haves and have-nots in terms of having a nuclear arsenal, which is completely unnecessary as well, and stressing global relations. Nuclear is a disaster. It's not CO2 free, it's too expensive. And if you fully load the cost with all the dangers, it's more than $1.27 a kilowatt hour. Way too expensive, not worth it, waste of money, waste of resources. We've got the solar energy, you don't need to reinvent the sun over here, where it can blow us up for no good reason. And it's human error that carries the cost. So no, absolutely not, it's a stupid plan.
I really wish that my friend Angelina would not hold back and she would tell us what she really thinks. I agree completely, but I don't just agree. I, with my personal vote, shut down 8 reactors in the Tennessee Valley Authority, shut down 1 in Sacramento, and spent my 91st and 92nd year lobbying to shut down the nuclear plants in California. So, but let me say something about Mr. Gates. We Americans have a very bad habit of thinking because somebody is really good in one particular field that they know something about something else. And it is a great mistake to take the opinion of somebody who was very good at making chips or whatever the hell it did to make all that money, but doesn't know doodly squat about nuclear power. And that's a fault that we have. We listen to celebrities who know nothing and don't listen to people who've had real life experience and do know something. It's something that's pretty hard to correct, but it's one of our faults. And this is an example of it. A man who is very smart about something, but has no understanding that the nuclear option is, in its own way, as awesomely dangerous as climate damage is. There is no peaceful atom. The path to the bomb is the atomic power plant. Why in the hell do you think that the Iranians and the Koreans and everybody else want nuclear power? It's a step toward enriching uranium to make the bomb.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we got that. I've got one last question. I think it's directed at either of you, but mainly for Angelina, I suppose, and that is, it seems we're moving towards regionalization in terms of our grid. If we are to do that, is there any danger that at some point California might be compelled to import non-clean energy, non-renewable energy resources?
No, because one of the
We're
principles...
already using them.
Well, we're using them, and it's true. It's to the extent that there's a fossil fleet nationwide, it all impacts the environment. But the benefits of a regional grid and optimization is to showcase, and it has showcased, the benefits of renewables in terms of cost because it's dispatched by cost. So to the extent that we've got solutions for renewable energy, a regional grid will be optimizing renewable energy. Also, one of the principles for participating in the energy imbalance market and the regional grid is that each state retains its autonomy in requiring their energy and the power mix. So California cannot be compelled to do anything that is against its principles, just like other states can. The economics, though, are driving the fossil out of the market. So we don't see that danger because the governing principle is state autonomy and state rights, and we already tax fossil energy that comes here with a carbon tax that may grow even more. We can accelerate the process if there is a more universal goal towards 100%, and hopefully that happens very soon, not just on an economic basis, but a regulatory requirement as well throughout the West, not just California.
Let me just add this thought. Think about that question just a little bit. Think about it. If these other states are emitting fossil fuel, it's going to hurt us anyhow. Aren't we better off if we integrate with them and have some small chance of influencing them to get away from fossil fuels? The question, with all due respect, shows a lack of our accepting the fact that we're all in the same little boat. And what happens in Colorado and what happens in Michigan and what happens in the red state of Texas affects us just as much as if it happened in California. So we ought to be eager to have some influence on these other states. The question, if you think about it, makes no sense.
Well, it does.
It makes no sense because we are stuck with the coal that's being burned in other states. We're all in the same boat.
But here's what Original Grid would do. Take Wyoming, for instance, which is a coal state. If it's integrated to California, Wyoming wind or New Mexico wind is very beneficial to California and balances our solar. We can export solar to them, and they can bring wind to us, and potentially there would be more jobs in Wyoming and New Mexico and other coal states in wind and renewables than ever were in coal.
Yeah, that's
And
kind of my
that's a way to
point.
move them forward.
That's my point. If we're in the same pool, we have a chance of influencing them. But if we're not, they're burning the coal, and it's one greenhouse up there. So I don't understand the argument.
All right, well, thank you so much for those comments. We learned a lot, and I'll turn the proceedings over to Sarah Kennington.
They don't. I mean, it makes no sense.
That was great. Thank you so much. So now we have a half-hour break. We've got lunch. It's Greek food. You'll see, and there's labels next to each dish, so you know if you have a dietary issue or you're wondering what's in that bowl. There are labels. So let's work to come back here at 12:30 for the afternoon panel. So we also have the California Native Plant Society back here. Please check them out. We have COFEM, the Council of Mexican Federations, back here. We have a pretty big group up from the Coachella Valley. Thank you for coming this afternoon. Am I forgetting? So I think the Wildlands has some literature, and so have lunch. Oh, and you might want to renew your membership to the MBCA, but enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Enjoyed our food. I wanted to first of all thank our volunteers, MBCA's volunteers. So many of them have helped so much on this. Kathy Zarikoff in particular, our volunteer coordinator, has really been just great in terms of getting people together to help us as we put these events together. Our food today was from Aliki's Greek Taverna in LA. They have a stand at the Joshua Tree Farmers Market, and we're very, very helpful in getting the food together, so I hope everyone enjoyed that. I also wanted to give a shout out today to Desert Images and Copy Center here in Yucca Valley, who helped us so much with copying many of the papers and documents that we've used today. And certainly I want to thank the town of Yucca Valley for their working with us for this, to put the facility together. They scrambled last week to get the technology together so that we can have our PowerPoint working the way it is. So thanks so much to them for that. I'd like at this point to ask Meg Foley if she might come up and, how about Lorraine Turk?
Yeah, Meg would need it up here. I need it down here. We are having an exchange of presidents for the first time in 5 years, and our past president, immediate past president, Sarah Kennington, took on the job with reluctance at times, over and over again, and we are so grateful because we really feel that MBCA, under Sarah's leadership and with our great team of directors, has moved forward. I mean, just the idea that we have the kind of panel and speakers that we have today and bringing out this many people, we've really achieved many of our goals, and Sarah had a lot to do with it. So Sarah, come on up. We're just going to thank you with a small gift. Well, thank you. I said earlier that I thanked each board member, and each board member is terrific, but the whole chemistry of this board is really remarkable. And I thought about saying, but I didn't say earlier, we actually have fun together. I mean, and I learn something every week. Some of my, I'm so glad, so Steve is my husband. It's my husband. But when I looked around the board for like, okay, who's going to step up to the plate to be the next president? It was like, well, Lorraine had been the president for 4 years before I was. And I mean, there's this great longevity, but just about David Fick had been the president. I think who else? Everybody had been the president. So it was my turn. And so anyway, Steve is rescuing me. Not really, because we'll be maybe a little bit. We've been a team, but we'll continue to be a team. But it's really a pleasure. And let me look. Maybe I should look at this. Oh, some beautiful cards. And well, I'll check this all out later. Huh? Ooh, Cactus Mark. Cool. Well, thank you. It's great. I thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Cactus Mart sounds like I have some hole digging in my future. The event here is referred to as an energy summit, and it's not just electrical energy, it's really people energy, and that's what an energy of activism that we are looking to really capitalize on and utilize as we move forward. And David's comments earlier of we need to do something, we need to be offensive on this thing, and that requires energy and focus to do something like that. So this is something MBCA is going to be taking on, and you'll see this as we move forward. One thing, speaking of energy, this is the time of year, typically at our annual meeting, we have, I'm surprised no one brought one in today, but they'll bring in their sort of sequoia-sized Sahara mustard. We were out hiking yesterday and found some up at 4,300 feet. It's going to be a boom year for wildflowers, and it also looks like it's going to be a boom year for Sahara mustard. So we have a handout over here that describes a little bit about Sahara mustard. And as many of you know, when you scrape the desert, invasives move in, and Sahara mustard is one of those invasives that we want to keep an eye on. So just a heads up, if you see some and can eradicate it, all the better. At this point, I wanted to ask April Saul to come up. April is currently many of you know her through the fight against Green Path North that would have put power lines on these buttes that you see within this, going right across these buttes you see in this photograph. Currently, April is the director of the Bodie Hills Conservation Area, and she is the president of the CDC, California Desert Concert Coalition. So April would like to say a few words.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. All right. You know, we are all very fortunate and blessed to be here in the California desert. You all know that well. We have an amazing quality of life, amazing resources. And we have been faced with many of egregious landscape-altering proposals. And you all have stepped up and answered the call time and time again, and used your voices to speak up for this desert and for this amazing landscape. In 2007, we began what became a 10-year battle for projects and proposals for energy development across this landscape. And we have since moved into a new model that supports development on disturbed lands, rooftop solar, and we have been able to enjoy the current reality that was once an alternative in those plans that keeps our open space the way we know it for support of our tourism and recreation economies, for our quality of life, and for all of us that live here to experience the natural beauty and the solitude that comes from these resources. We were able to design and demand that alternative by using public comment and our voices in the processes described through federal actions and state actions to protect these resources. And you know that you are responsible for that alternative and for that reality. We created and we rebuilt the community power to stand up to those that had an advantage at the time in those proposals, to keep our open space and to take control of our future and our destiny. When faced with these ill-proposed projects, you all continued to show up and use your voice in public comment. The late Peter Douglas, founder of the California Coastal Commission, was asked at the end of his career how he felt about saving so much of California's coastline. You know what his response was? The coast is never saved. It is always being saved. Notice the active tense. That applies, friends, to our California desert. The California Desert Coalition, now with 501c3 as of this week, is working to bring you a series of workshops, advocacy workshops, to further our community power, refine our public comment skills, and our knowledge and effectiveness in engaging in federal, state, and regional planning processes. The workshops will focus on how to make public comments, how to make the most effective public comments, whether it's in your 3 minutes at the podium or your letter to your elected official or to a government agency. Topics will include things such as the National Environmental Policy Act, what is an environmental impact statement, but most importantly, how do you affect the outcome in those documents and in those processes. We will also cover the California Environmental Quality Act, likely in a second workshop, potentially in part 2 of the first one, as well as hopefully a follow-up that'll be a regional and local planning workshop about engaging with your Board of Supervisors, your local town councils, and your planning commissions. It will be helpful to have teams of folks that will be able to think about how to tier off their public comments, how to strategize about using your 3 minutes at the podium so that the whole story is told, and you can speak with authority about the topics that you know or the things you feel most passionate about. As you've heard today, we need to do more, and we need to be prepared to do more. And we hope at CDC, California Desert Coalition, to be able to help all of us do that to affect the outcome. As you heard, on February 28th, there will be a Board of Supervisors hearing about REAS 4.10. We have been following this and encouraging this policy for over 6 years now, so please show up to that. That's one example. Soon we are also likely to see the reopening of the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, the DRECP. That was an 8-year planning process that many of us here engaged in to see renewable energy focused in specific disturbed land areas, in development focus areas, and not across the entire landscape. It's a very important plan, and there's been a lot of public investment, and the Trump administration is looking to reopen that and likely gut a lot of the policies that make that document what it is. And what that policy means to us is incredibly important, and it will need your voice. One more thing I just wanted to point out, as we approach the 3rd anniversary of the Sand to Snow, Mojave Trails, and Castle Mountains National Monuments, we have yet to see a management plan even begin for that process. We have friends here in the room with Conservation Lands Foundation that are looking at community alternative proposals, but this administration has really been focused on rolling back protections, and we will again need your voice to stand up for this landscape, because it's the only thing that matters and it's the only thing that can influence these processes and these decision makers. So please come to the workshops, look for dates and details to come soon, and we hope to see you there to further invest in this wonderful landscape that we call home. Thank you. All right, I would like to introduce our next speaker, someone who has played a very important role in the California desert and the Morongo Basin in my life as well. She is a teacher, and she is at Yucca Valley High School. She started a program called the Field Ecology class back in 1997, where she first asked Morongo Basin Conservation Association for some support that they continue to provide every year. Thank you very much. And she has influenced so many lives and so many young lives across this basin to become leaders in conservation, in the environment, in outdoor education, and many things that support the policy and stewardship that we value in protecting public lands. Besides my wonderful parents, she is the one individual who is also most responsible for me going into the conservation world and the conservation movement and land management. So without further ado, the 2016 winner of the Munir Hoyt Award, Cindy Zaks.
Has anybody seen those American Express commercials where they're like going to the opera and they say, you know, a new dress for the opera, you know, so much dollars, a new pair of shoes for the opera, so much dollars, but a night out with your husband is priceless, those kinds of things. I always think of all the benefits that teaching has provided me for the last 26 years here at Yucca High, but these guys, they're the priceless. So, April and Fraser and Jack and more that aren't here, but they're in my heart. So, let's try not to cry too much. So, Fraser, you've got so many different titles that I'm going to have to remember I'm going to have to look at them here. So currently the Associate Southern California Director for the Conservation Lands Foundation. So Fraser's been working since he left UC Santa Cruz with a degree in ecology, so 15 years in all aspects of conservation, getting people introduced to the wilderness, protecting wilderness, restoring wilderness, everything you can think of. Raising money to purchase wild lands, everything that you can think of over the last 15 years. Most recently, he was the conservation or the director of land conservation at the Mojave Desert Land Trust. How many acres of land did you raise money to save while you were there?
Can everybody hear me? The land trust during my time acquired about 25,000 acres while I was there.
Amazing. And that's preserved in perpetuity. He serves on the Bureau of Land Management's Desert Advisory Council as the Environmental Protection Representative and is a volunteer board member still with the Wildlands Conservancy, who he also worked for many, many, many years. So by evidence by the fact that he was in my class, we know that he grew up in Joshua Tree, and I remember both Fraser and Jack and April, of course, as wee bits in high school, and it's just been such a pleasure. I haven't had the pleasure to meet Vanessa, but I'm very excited to see that she's here. And so she is the program assistant for the Council of Mexican Federations in North America, which is a nonprofit that empowers immigrant communities to be full participants in the social, political, economic, environmental, and cultural life in the U.S. She was born in Mexico, but has lived most of her life in the Coachella Valley and works down there to improve support and advocate for immigrant families and students in her area. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from CSU Fullerton, and currently works in partnership to engage Latino communities in preserving national conservation lands and monuments. So we're very happy to have you here. We have Marina, who's a local resident, Marina Wagner. She is a landscape designer, works part-time as a nursery and seed bag technician for the Mojave Desert Land Trust. Were you there before Fraser left there and went to the, yeah, so you guys got a chance to work together? Great. So she just finished her master's in landscape architecture from Cal Poly, just spring of last year. Her thesis research focused on challenges facing restoration of disturbed sites in and around Joshua Tree National Park. And she used all sorts of field studies and meta-analysis, which I hear is an incredible amount of work and a feat that you did all of that work. So that's wonderful. She won the 2018 ASLA Student Award of Excellence. She also has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from University of Southern California, so USC. And currently she's offering planting design, consulting in the Arid West, experience with native vegetation, planting ecological processes, and is fascinated by the complex systems that make up our Mojave Desert. So thank you, Marina. And Jack is also one of our locally grown conservation folks. He grew up here. He's been working in the conservation field for the last 20 years, bringing people into the wilderness as well, managing wilderness. He is the regional desert regional, sorry, these titles get complicated. Desert Regional Director for the Wildlands Conservancy and the staff photographer. How many of you have seen Jack's photography work? It is beautiful work. So he is managing 30,000 acres of conservation lands, lives down at the Whitewater Preserve. He every year is so kind to host my AP biology kids. We go down there for an overnight and use the resources down there for some of our labs. So we're working back and forth together now. His photography was used in the campaign to protect Mojave Trails and Sand to Snow, and has also shown up in the Atlantic. I didn't know that. That's amazing. LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, High Country News, and he continues to work on restoration work and access and everything in the Whitewater Preserve and the desert areas for the Wildlands Conservancy. And I'm not sure who's handling the questions. Okay, Lorraine. Okay, all right.
Introductions
Thank
of our
you.
people.
Sure.
We are so appreciative. I think you have probably noticed that we did want to emphasize a generational theme here. Mr. Freeman, oh my gosh, decades and decades of work on behalf of conservation and the environment. Angelina, literally a student of his in a way, carrying that on, and especially here in California. And then with Cindy having been the focal point for the education of several of these young people and many more in the basin. And we who are on the board of directors, we all recognize a lot of gray hair among us, and we would, we really value and want to engage the younger, oh no, you don't have, not compared to us. But the younger people are so critical, as was brought up by our other speakers. So we would like each of them to talk a bit about their ideas about what they're doing and its effect on the future, here especially in the desert. And at the end of, we'll just kind of go down the line if they're okay with that. And then we will again ask you, if you have questions, if you used your question sheet before, borrow one from a neighbor and send your questions down the row at the end of their speeches, and we will present those questions to them and get additional information. So, Fraser.
Thank you. Thanks, Lorraine. I've got a few slides, so I think I'm going to... Hi, everybody. Well, I just have to say before I get started that you don't turn 50 every year, so let's hear it again for MBCA and their 50th anniversary. It's pretty amazing, and I have been a beneficiary of some of the organizations that Cindy mentioned, the Wildlands Conservancy, Mojave Desert Land Trust, and now Conservation Lands Foundation, and I partnered a lot with the folks at MBCA and the other organizations that are in the basin. It's amazing that these organizations exist in our area. We're all able to accomplish so much more than we would be able to on our own through all working together through those organizations. So I'm grateful for that, and we're blessed with that. I think Yeah, that's me right there. So I just wanted to give everybody in the room a little background on the Conservation Lands Foundation and tell you where I'm at these days and what I'm up to. And I'll do my best to be fairly brief. So everybody here, how many people here know the National Park Service? Everybody? Probably everybody. And the National Park Service is over 100 years old. And how many people know the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? Okay, very good, most folks. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service manages federal land in their refuge system. So there's the service and there's their refuge system, and that's their way of establishing rules and processes to take care of our public land as an agency. How many of you know the Bureau of Land Management? Yeah, pretty much everybody, or the BLM, to use an acronym. So then the next question is, how many of you know what the National Conservation Land System is? Okay, yeah, we're getting somewhere now. So the National Conservation Land System was created by secretarial order in 2000, 18 years ago, 19 years ago now, and it was codified by Congress in 2009. And it's supposed to be BLM's system for managing the conservation lands under their stewardship. So when you think of Joshua Tree National Park, that's Park Service. But when we think of Sand to Snow National Monument, that's part of the National Conservation Lands. And across the West, there's over 36 billion acres in the National Conservation Land System. You might have heard of a little national monument in southern Utah called Bears Ears. That's a part of the system that's been getting a lot of attention lately. Grand Staircase Escalante, Red Rocks Canyon National Conservation Area. So all across the West, BLM manages national conservation lands. And these places are open for all kinds of things. This is the part of the desert that I love most. I love my national park, don't get me wrong. But when I go out camping on Thanksgiving, we have dogs and we bury a turkey in the ground and we collect rocks, and so we go out to places like the Chuckwalla Bench or the Whipple Mountains, and those are part of the National Conservation Lands. There's also pretty huge economic benefits across the United States from the system of national conservation lands because people go to do all of those things that I just listed as tourists on our public lands. So it's estimated that there's an $887 billion outdoor recreation economy in the United States. The national conservation lands are a big part of that. Here in California, some of the local units that you might recognize, Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, Mojave Trails, Santa Rosa and San Jacinto Mountains National Monument, or the Chuckwalla Bench. And we work to try and raise the profile of some of these areas. So now we start to get into energy policy a little bit more because some places on this list will ring a bell with people if you've been following along in the energy fight in the California desert the last 10 years. One such place is Silurian Valley, where a 16,000 acre wind and solar farm was proposed in a pristine and beautiful ecological area that's the doorstep into Death Valley National Park. It's just north of Baker. Another area is the Amargosa Basin, which is home to the only free-flowing river in the Mojave Desert. And how many people here have been to Shoshone or Tecopa? Yeah, it's an amazing place and surrounded by national conservation lands. So, at every one of these locations, whether it's Mojave Trails or the Bears Ears National Monument, there's a local community that supports those public lands, that drives the conservation of those public lands and their protection, but also does stewardship of those public lands, and is there every time there's a threat to those public lands. It might be trail restoration, it might be collecting native seeds, it might be fighting the fight in Washington, D.C. when necessary. But in every one of those areas, there's a grassroots presence that helps protect those public lands. And the Conservation Lands Foundation is built with that idea in mind, that a foundation should be there to help raise funds and support local grassroots willpower and efforts to protect this system of public lands. So that's what we call the Friends Grassroots Network. And at this point across the West, the Conservation Lands Foundation supports about 70 groups in the Friends Grassroots Network with a variety of training, mentoring, direct grant making, and also just as an information clearinghouse so people can share support for each other or trade secrets all across the West. This spring, Utah Dene BCA, which was a leading organization in the fight for bears' ears, is hosting a tribal engagement workshop for members of the Friends Grassroots Network. So they're all going to gather in southern Utah and talk about how to better engage tribes in public lands issues. That's just a for instance. And the Friends Grassroots Network is diverse. It is an incredible cross-section of the Western United States. It's folks from all walks of lives and all backgrounds, rural communities, urban communities. And we think that that is the future of conservation in not only the Western United States, but worldwide. If we're going to face the next few decades of conservation and win those fights, we have to broaden the way that we think about building communities and engaging with each other, and really, as David put it, realize that we're all in the same boat together. So we need to make sure that our conservation movement is as diverse and inclusive and equitable as it possibly can be. And that's the end of my slides. So I'll say a couple of things about what I'm working on directly right now. I was glad to hear April mention a few of them earlier. February 12th is the 3rd anniversary of Sand to Snow, Mojave Trails, and Castle Mountains National Monument. So that's an amazing day. That's pretty incredible. We fought for a long time for those. And I brought some maps, because I like maps, of Mojave Trails National Monument. They're on the back table over there so that you can get out into the National Monument. Go see the flowers at Amboy in a few weeks. Amboy doesn't have a gate. They can't shut it down. And we got rain, so there's going to be a bloom. For those of you with a four-wheel drive, maybe go check out Bonanza Spring or Cadiz Dunes and see the bloom there in Mojave Trails. Another thing that April mentioned was the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, or as some people they've coined the acronym DRECP. I hate that acronym. So I just call it the Desert Plan at this point. That's good enough. And a few of us cooked up a sheet about the Desert Plan and what's at stake with the Desert Plan right now and the coming amendment. But we fought for so long to get solar into zones in the California desert so that it couldn't be spread across millions of acres. And if the Desert Plan is opened back up in a major way, we could be faced with that same situation again of utility scale solar being on more lands rather than being a little more constrained and away from sensitive areas. So this fact sheet, along with, yes, another map, are on the back table for you to pick up too. And if anybody has questions for me too, I've got cards back there, so you can just grab a card and call me anytime. Thank you very much.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, so I would also like to share my slides just so that you all know what we do, because we are a nonprofit organization, but we do focus on various programs, not just environmental. And you probably see the Mexican flag and we get a lot of people thinking that we're the consulate, but we're not. So our mission is to empower immigrant communities to be full participants in the social, political, economic, cultural, and environmental life of the United States and in their home country. We accomplish this work by uniting, strengthening, expanding our member organizations to better advocate, preserve, and share their cultural traditions and help their families and friends in their country of origin. We are based in LA. Our office out there is located in Placita Alvera. Is anybody familiar with Placita Alvera? It's a very nice historic place, and it's in front of the LA Union Station. If you ever stop by, you're gonna love it. But we also have an office in the Coachella Valley. We're located in the city of Coachella Corporate Yard. And in Coachella, we have 3 programs. Our first one is immigration, where we provide citizenship assistance for people that are residents and that qualify to become citizens. We do their application for free. And we provide workshops every month where we collaborate with an immigration attorney if they have legal questions regarding their eligibility to apply for citizenship, or maybe just to get a free consultation. We also provide Know Your Rights workshops. We like to inform people of their rights. Regardless of their status, everybody has rights and everybody needs to know them, especially right now. We also provide assistance with the DACA renewal program and free immigration clinics, where we pretty much combine all of these services in one event. We also like to invite other community organizations for them to provide information on the services that they provide. And also a clinic where they can provide anemia and glucose testing. You know, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes, but it's a service that it's for free, and people can do it while they wait in line to get their application started. And we also like to provide informational sessions on citizenship and DACA. These sessions help community members understand what's happening politically. Some people might get the wrong information, and you know that can impact their case, so we like to inform them of that. Then we have our education program, where we like to work with community members and educators and other partners to advocate for underserved students in the Eastern Coachella Valley achieve a higher education. We've been part of a coalition where we've done advocacy work. We've taken families and parents and students go to the state capitol and advocate for bills that will support these students. And then we have our environmental program, which is why we're here today, where we advocate for our desert's public lands. COFEM, in partnership with the Conservation Lands Foundation, works to increase civic engagement from Latino communities in the Eastern Coachella Valley, and therefore advocate for the protection and public access of the national conservation lands and national monuments. We do this by engaging Latino communities in outdoor activities like hikes, camping trips, guided tours, and we are not able to do this without the collaboration of other organizations that are experts, because as you noticed, we're not an organization that focuses just on environmental justice efforts, but we do like to invite Latino communities. So when we have other partners that are interested in inviting us, they are the ones that are the teachers, right? They teach our parents and youth on the history, the wildlife habitat, like why is it important. So we've been happy to work with Mojave Desert Land Trust, Friends of the Desert Mountains, Big Morongo Canyon Preserve, Sierra Club, and many more. And one of the main things that we like to do is use the testimonies and experiences of our parents and youth to be able to provide diverse voices on the conservation efforts that happen here in the desert. We like to really highlight the family and community unity that these parents experience. We have a couple of them in the back. Want to say hi? Yeah, so them, when I started working, a lot of them have already been familiar with the land, so they know a lot, and for them to experience this lands and coming from another country, they really like to share that unity with their family and learn about it, right? And so another thing is that they enjoy the beauty of nature, and every time we take them, everybody's always so amazed. Well, wow, I've been living here for more than 15 years, and this is the first time that I see the Coachella Valley, like the nice view. And so that's always really nice to hear. And then, you know, with that, we teach them, and they learn how to protect the lands, which is always good. You know, we get more voices, especially diverse voices. And then, you know, some of the challenges that we face is language. Our community members are Spanish speaking. We do a lot of our work in Spanish, so a lot of them don't know English, so we try to translate. And sometimes I feel bad because we'll be in the back and people might think we're whispering or being rude, but we're just trying to translate, right? And so that really is one of the challenges that we face, but I know that there's organizations that always try to do their best to help us out with that, or, they have a staff member that does speak Spanish, so that's always good. And then our immigration political climate is also an issue. We do work with immigrant communities, and so sometimes when we invite them out to the outdoors, sometimes there is that fear because of what's happening now, or they may not feel comfortable leaving their city, and they're not used to driving, far, right, more than an hour, and they might think, well, Border Patrol might be around, and that might be triggering. So that is an issue that we also see. And then, as you know, the current administration right now, as much work that we do in immigration, and our communities are being attacked, our lands are also being attacked. So, we also try to do work around that and try to be a support, because we know that we also have gained allies in the conservation efforts. So we try to do the same for our lands. And, if you have any more questions, we're in the back. Our table is out there. We try to provide, we try to bring materials in English because, like I said, the majority is in Spanish. So then we have a problem of we don't have materials in English. We need to bring some. But if you have any more questions, my contact information is there, and I also have cards over there. And yes, thank you.
Okay, hi. So I have a few slides as well. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank a lot of the directors at MBCA. I was able to receive a grant from the Joshua Tree National Park Association, and many of the directors here were crucial to that happening, so thank you. And so what I can speak to is a little bit about the research that I did in my thesis. My thesis itself was just focused on revegetation efforts in the Morongo Basin and in Joshua Tree National Park. So what I was looking at was, it was an attempt to aggregate data, data that I collected as well as the available literature, to see what are some of the factors affecting this region in terms of restoration of disturbed sites. And so, that's fine. And so I wanted to take this slide just for a moment. This is just a map, but it shows, and all of you are very familiar with this region, but it shows an importance to research in the Morongo Basin. So the Morongo Basin is, has multiple ecological transition zones. Ecological transition zones are where ecological communities shift. And so Joshua Tree National Park is a boundary there between the Mojave and the Sonoran Desert. And in addition, to the west is the boundary between the Joshua Tree woodland and the chaparral ecosystem. So when you have these ecosystems blending and transitioning into each other, this is a really important place for research, because in these transition zones, species, plants, animals are all at the edge of their range, and that is where you're going to start seeing reactions to climate change. And so this region provides an opportunity to better understand what's going on in terms of that. So I conducted a literature review to start, and that really revealed that deserts are very slow to recover and very easily damaged. And most of you probably have an understanding of that just from what you see going on in your daily life. In addition, I'll take a moment to explain. So I thoroughly researched all the theories behind conservation, preservation, historical conservation, and restoration. And restoration is an active technique that when some of these more conservative measures like conservation or preservation cannot achieve an ecological balance. And so it's a measure that we can look at, oops, did I just press that? Oh. To meet those management goals. A meta-analysis is a really involved process. It's basically a major study of studies. And so I conducted one for the whole Mojave Desert region, and the important thing that revealed in this was that there is a really limited amount of research in the Mojave Desert, but in general, specifically in the Morongo Basin, because most of what's been researched or tested, the park's conducted a lot of tests, but there has not been a lot of published research in this area. What has been focused on is some of the factors including native grasses, nitrogen deposition, and altered fire cycles. And so that signals to me that those are some of the issues that people are looking at that maybe warrant further research. In addition, the recreational OHV use, military activity, and planting tests, basically. So what I did in my study was I surveyed 8 different sites. 4 properties were owned by the Mojave Desert Land Trust and shared a boundary with the national park, and 4 properties were within the national park. All received various disturbance resulting from human use. And so I conducted the belt transect method to survey vegetation. We counted and measured almost 3,000 individual plant species. In addition, I took soil tests at each site because soil is a really important factor in all of this. And I won't get into some of those details today. But just looking at one site really quickly, this is Indian Cove Borrow Pit, which was a gravel extraction pit in Joshua Tree National Park. It was severely disturbed, and as you can see in the image on the bottom, and restored in 2005. This presented a really unique opportunity to look at a severe disturbance, but also a site that had been restored heavily, and you could see a change in the course of 10 years. So this bottom image is before it was restored, and this bottom image over to the other side is it today. What was important to note, especially in this site, was the extreme discrepancy between the plant populations, between the reference site, which is the above image, and the restoration site below. This says that the early succession species that recruit on these sites have a really longer lifespan than one would expect, and they're incredibly dominant and compared to some of the later succession species that struggle to recruit. So what was really important and really fun in my research was looking at how these communities develop in the Mojave Desert. So I compiled a list based off of available research as well as what I was seeing at my sites. Between the early colonizers, the versatile species, which were ones that existed in both early communities and late communities, and then the late succession species and ones that are extremely long-lived. So, for example, like creosote or Joshua tree that can live over hundreds of years. And so looking at the sites, comparing the vegetation composition, this is complex, but what's important to note is that across the board, almost across the board, and the reference sites, the sites that hadn't been heavily disturbed, were dominated by later or versatile succession species like Hilaria rigida, whereas the restoration sites were dominated by early succession species like Ambrosia damosa. What's important about this is this provides an opportunity to look at restoration and how we can create a successful restoration of disturbed sites, because these early succession species play an important role in establishing the later succession species by breaking up soils, by providing habitat, by increasing available nutrients. And so it's a promising strategy for creating a successful restoration. And so looking at Indian Cove was really important because it demonstrated that after 11 years, the total number of shrub species on the completely barren site increased 4.5 times that of the initial planting. So within 10 years, it is possible to achieve a vegetation density that is comparable in terms of numbers to reference sites, but is very different in terms of diversity and species. And so talking about leadership and best practices, bringing this all together, some of the things that I noticed that were really important for successful restoration were the use of outplanted species. So a lot of literature in the Mojave Desert speaks to the inability of aerial seeding or direct seeding to just not really be successful. And so outplanted container stock is much more successful. Utilizing early succession species, using plants and even dead vegetation as nurse microhabitats. There's a significant importance to using herbivore protection around the plants because the animals have a very significant impact on the success or failure of a restoration project. And then also there's a real lack of data looking at these projects at a longer time frame, and so that's extremely important. A lot of the time people will conduct a restoration, they'll monitor it, they'll water it for 2 to 3 years, and then they'll walk away. And we really kind of don't know how well that is doing over the course of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and beyond. And that's what's really important. And so finally, some policy recommendations. Since my background is in landscape architecture, we're a highly multidisciplinary field, and so all of these things are really important to us. So improving collaboration across fields, state, federal, individuals is really important. There's a need for increased funding for restoration of disturbed sites. The local plant material that preserves the genetic variability of the species is incredibly important. And in addition, incorporating a human connection to plants. And there's a lot of space for more research too. And so those are some of the other factors. Okay, and my partners were the Joshua Tree National Park, Joshua Tree National Park Association, and Mojave Desert Land Trust. Thank you.
There's your mic. Steal your chair there from the
You want this?
slides. Yeah, that would be great. Might help me be able to.
Yeah, but it's kind of hard.
You can barely tell us apart anyway. It's really great to be here, and it's a real honor to be in such a wonderful company that have done such incredible work over so many years. Yeah, I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of some incredible people, and well, that solves that.
Yeah.
So I'm the regional director, desert regional director for the Wildlands Conservancy, and I'm sure some of you, maybe just a show of hands, are any of you familiar with the Wildlands Conservancy, maybe through some of our preserves? Great, that's really good to see. Yeah, so our organization was born in this area with our founding preserve being surrounding Pioneer Town. It's called the Pioneer Town Mountains Preserve. And it's about 25,000 acres, and it kind of makes the critical linkage at the east end of the Transverse Range where the San Bernardino Mountains are transitioning into the desert. And the vision of that preserve was part of a larger vision of doing conservation work in this area that would protect vital wildlife corridors and preserve public access. And some of the people that are in this room were a large part of that. So it's almost kind of funny to be speaking about this without you telling some of this origin story. Some of you were a huge part of that. So if I miss anything there, know that I'm just trying to be brief because it's a big story and I can't tell all of it. So the mission of the Wildlands Conservancy is to preserve the beauty and the biodiversity of the earth and to fund programs so that children may know the wonder and joy of nature. And that second part of our mission is very critical to our belief that the boundaries that we put around protected areas will need to be continually protected by future generations, and that those future generations
won't have the passion and the relationship to the land if they don't have access to it. And so part of that access also is the necessity to have outdoor education be a large component of the mission as well. So our organization raises money to make sure that our local school children can visit these preserves as part of their education. So generally we see about 25,000 children per year through the organization-wide preserves. And locally, we run outdoor education programs through the Mission Creek Preserve and the Whitewater Preserve to the tune of this year around 5,000 kids. This is a map that shows our preserves throughout California, and you can see that they stretch all the way, from Southern California to Northern California. This picture is of Whitewater Preserve, where I began work there with this gentleman that's posing as me, at least in name. In 2007, where Fraser had been at work starting in 2006. And that project was pretty emblematic of the approach that Wildlands Conservancy would take on its conservation work, which is to identify lands that were critical for conservation for a number of reasons, for preservation of critical habitat, wildlife corridors, watersheds, and also public access. This is a shot of our Oakland Preserve, where quite a lot of outdoor education programs are run. They have one of the largest outdoor education programs in the organization. That's where there's a botanical garden that was recently created, and that is a wonderful place. If anyone has never visited, it's coming together amazingly, and hopefully this year will be a big year for wildflowers there. So, can't avoid the maps. So this map can kind of give you some perspective of the scope of the Conservancy's conservation efforts throughout the Mojave. What you're seeing, these large boundaries, you can see the boundaries of Sand to Snow and Mojave Trails. And inside Mojave Trails are all these little dots, these little squares that you can see kind of going along it. And the route that kind of defines the path that it takes is Route 66. And one of the things that got Wildlands Conservancy very much involved in the conversation of renewable energy was a conservation purchase that happened in the late 90s when railroad grants in private hands that followed the Route 66 corridor were going to be sold on the open market, and those lands traversed conservation lands that were precious to Californians who loved the desert, and many here probably remember the California Desert Protection Act of 1994 that made Joshua Tree National Park, Death Valley National Park, Mojave National Preserve. And these private railroad lands were inside of those conservation lands that many people were deeply in love with and cared very much and worked very hard to preserve. And when they were in danger of being sold and potentially developed, the Wildlands Conservancy worked to raise the money to purchase those lands and ensure that they were turned back over to the public interest. It's still considered to be one of the largest, if not the largest, conservation land purchases that was donated back to the American people in U.S. history. So, when years later that land was potentially going to be looked at for the siting of renewable energy, the Wildlands Conservancy and people in this room were quite involved in making sure that renewable energy would be sited responsibly. And that conversation carried through to the legislation that proposed the Sand to Snow National Monument and Mojave Trails National Monument. Sand to Snow National Monument took its name from the Wildlands Conservancy's Sand to Snow project, which was the goal to ensure that critical linkages that were in private hands could be bought and turned into conservation lands to ensure that there would be linkages between Joshua Tree National Park, the Bighorn Mountains Wilderness, and the San Bernardino Mountains and the San Jacinto Mountains to the south. This kind of gives a little bit of a picture of the regional preserves through the Wildlands Conservancy. You can see on the northeastern portion of the San Gorgonio Wilderness, and now the Sand to Snow National Monument, is the Pioneer Town Mountains Preserve. So you can kind of get a sense of these large pieces of land that are in conservation that link the landscape together. You can also see the Whitewater Preserve down there in the south, which is kind of the critical entryway for people in the Coachella Valley to get to the Sand of Snow National Monument. So I know I've kind of said a mouthful to kind of give you guys a little bit of a regional sense of how the Wildlands Conservancy's preserve fit into conservation in the area. And what I think I'd really just like to leave you with is that, at the core of, nonprofit conservation are people just like you, people who care about these lands so much and have lent so much of your energy and your time to speak up for it when it matters the most. And that the real goal of the Wildlands Conservancy is to be a partner with communities just like yourselves and to be in this kind of constant dialogue and determining the future of the lands that we all have grown up in and are so important to us. So it's wonderful to be here with you all, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
It does, excuse me, it does give you a heartening feeling, doesn't it, to know that these passionate young people, I mean, I know some of you say, oh, I'm not that young, but you are, and that the future of our conservation concerns is really in good hands. Please, if you have a question, pass your card with a question to the end of the row. I'd like to ask, especially those of you related to organizations, what advice would you give to MBCA about connecting more with younger people? What are the issues? What are the methods? What do you do in your organizations when you want to connect more with people, younger people? I know families is something that Vanessa mentioned is important to your work, and of course school children to the others. What about that millennials group, the young just getting started in their careers? How do we get a hold of them and share our message with them and get them involved?
I'll take a shot at that. I was given a tremendous amount of responsibility a couple times. One, April gave me my first job, full-time job. Thanks, April, for believing me. But through my 15 years in conservation work, people have just continuously believed in me and put a lot of faith in me and put me in positions to have a lot of responsibility. When I was 24, I was given the task of trying to coordinate restoration of the Whitewater Preserve from the Whitewater Trout Hatchery. And my job was really just as coordination. It was trying to make sure everything was on time and money was spent and things like that. But it took somebody put a lot of faith on me. They kind of bet the trout farm on me, if you will. And,
Literally.
and that really launched me ahead in my career and has kept me on track. And also Cindy, all the students that Cindy's had through her class and teachers and mentors like Cindy put a lot of faith in myself and others when we were younger and just believed that we were going to listen to what she was telling us. So I would recommend engaging by giving people a lot of big responsibility where they can feel the impact that they're going to make.
Okay, I'll go. I think by giving them a seat at the table, I think when you have representation, you're gonna pull in more young people. For myself, I started getting involved with this work because of work, and it was scary in the beginning because I didn't know anything, and then I started realizing, wow, there's these organizations that just focus on this type of work. And then when we would go on hikes, it was funny because I didn't think it was work. I was like, how is this work? This is so fun. And so when I started telling my friends about my job, they were impressed. And so when I would share pictures, they would be like, hey, next time you should invite me. And so that's what I did. I started inviting friends and their friends and started inviting others. And that's how, you get a group, I think, by knowing someone, right? Because if you maybe go to a group and you might not feel comfortable. It might be difficult for someone to, start being engaged. But if you have someone that can share an experience with you, like myself, when I started talking to other folks, it was easier for me to pull them in. And then from then, they started, every event that we had, hey, let me know, even though they couldn't make it, sometimes they still wanted to know for the next one. And I think that's important. And I think that's a big one. I think giving them a seat at the table, especially maybe if you're mentioning on MBCA, if you have someone that's already involved and, being even part of the board possibly, and then they see that, they're going to want to gain that experience as well.
Thank you. Okay, we did get some questions. We have a few here for all the panelists. If you would talk about the challenge of reducing greenhouse gases through electrification of transportation, so electric cars and getting rid of gas-based transportation, and how could you engage your organizations in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas through more electric cars and so forth?
I'll go first again here. It's sometimes tough in nonprofits because nonprofits are constantly under the gun for funds. So one thing that the CLF has done, and I think a lot of other organizations are focusing on, is to try not to travel, but rather just commute from the front of a computer. I work from home in Joshua Tree. The foundation's headquarters is in Durango, but I only ever see the headquarters staff maybe once or twice a year. So I just stay parked at home to do most of my work, and it's kind of a virtual world in that way. If I'm on the road, it's to go to meetings with folks like you, or to get local voices out to decision makers. Another thing that we've talked about doing, and that we've done some of, but not instituted as a perfect policy, is buying carbon credits to offset airplane miles. So I'm seeing David shaking his head like that's a half measure. I can hear your words ringing in my head. But it's something. We're definitely thinking about it as an organization, how we reduce our carbon footprint. And a lot of it's just trying to think, do we really need to take certain activities? I'll stop there.
Any comments from the others?
Yeah, I mean, in that way, that's a really great question and a difficult one. The Wildlands Conservancy does its best to, generate solar at its facilities. And, from our point of view, I think when it comes to connecting with the public, that sense of education and that sense of really being connected to the land and understanding the consequences of what's happening to the world. And, that's, I think, along those lines, that's what a lot of our model has been about, is to have the reflection of the natural world in people's faces as clear as possible, and for them to make that relationship as much as they can, so that there's a connection between them and the landscape and the health of the landscape around them, and that there's not a huge separation in those two concepts.
Thank you. I have a question here from Marina, particularly. Can or is your research being used for an assessment rubric to designate or define a rating for the health of a disturbed site?
That's a great question. At the moment, no. It hasn't been formatted to be some sort of rubric. But I have been interested in sort of trying to develop a best practices for these types of projects. But it could be something in terms of looking at the sites and surveying and things like that could definitely easily be formatted into a rubric. There's an opportunity there that hasn't been filled, perhaps.
It'd be nice if you could get funded to do that yourself, right? This is a question for all the panelists. How can we as individual community members best support the work that each of you does? What more can we do? What can we do more than we're doing now? What would be the best things to do to support the work that you're doing?
Well, I think showing up at an MBCA panel on a Saturday and giving your time is a good first step. A lot of our organizations have newsletters and ways to stay engaged with lists. So whether it's Mojave Desert Land Trust, MBCA, or California Desert Coalition, or COFEM, or the Wildlands Conservancy, getting on those mailing lists for organizations that do work that you're interested in is a great first step. Keeping up with what they're doing, trying to peel off some of your hard-earned dollars to their mission every year, and then showing up is huge. So signing on to that letter that's circulating for a cause, or showing up to fundraisers or events and telling your friends to do the same. All those things are super important to nonprofits.
Well, for COFEM, I would say just invite us. This is, when I got the call, hey, you want to be part of the panel? I said yes, just let me know the date and time. And that's what we do. We invite the parents, so whenever you give me an event or something that you would like us to be part of, or maybe collaborate, I just have to let them know and see if they're available. So a simple invitation to the work that you do, or like I said, maybe organizing a hike. That's always best, just because we know that a lot of the times you'll be the experts, and all we really have to do is, bring Latino communities, and we get to learn from you, and I know that you'll get to learn from us. So yeah, I would just say, just invite us.
Yeah, I think I'd echo things that Fraser said. Those are all, I'd say all that 100%. Really, the kind of force multiplier effect of individuals that are in touch with, kind of critical issues that relate to your communities spreads when you tell your friends, and those kind of alerts that can come from groups like MBCA or MDLT or, Fraser's Outfit or the Wildlands Conservancy. That is being in touch with that and telling your friends to show up, just like he said, makes a huge difference when our decision makers need to hear from us, and that's a big deal for sure.
I have a last question, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit on it. The question was, what advice would you give to a high school student? And I think, just to elaborate on that, what would you tell a high school student to engage them in the conservation issues?
I was a high school student once. In days of yore. And for me, it was a volunteer opportunity that I was made aware of that got me started in conservation. And I know, Ruben, I'm going to pick on you, sorry. But Ruben in the back of the room was an intern and worked with Meg and the Friends of Big Morongo Canyon Preserve through a volunteer opportunity there, and is now part of our community. We're watching Ruben. Ruben's in Copper Mountain College, and so making those opportunities through volunteerships or internships. I think a lot of organizations they find a little bit of money to do a paid internship to bring people in and kind of give them a taste of their organization. So that's a really good career building move if people can get that money together. Or the other thing is making them aware of scholarships, and even a little bit of money put towards a scholarship from organizations can help engage high school students in the work that we're doing all together as a community. So I'd say those things: internships, scholarships, volunteer opportunities, and try and set up opportunities that let the person kind of choose their own adventure instead of telling them exactly what they should do.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that last piece that, Fraser said about really them choosing, once they have the opportunity to explore these new avenues, that, that is going to hopefully give enough awareness of new paths and for a passion there to develop. And, finding that thing that you're passionate about is really the great start. And once you have that hook put in you, then, that's the real key. And those opportunities, just like Fraser said, I think are the great place to start to make sure that something really can fit who you are and what it is that you're best at and how you want to go and pursue that.
I think for me, it would be sharing a personal experience. We did, I think last year, we went to high school in the Coachella Valley, and we did a presentation on the work that we do for the environmental program because we were planning a trip and we wanted to invite students. And when I shared about them that my first time camping was because of a high school field trip, they were interested, right? They said, "Oh, well, that's cool. You know, you were able to go with your friends." And the thing was that when I asked them if they were going to do it, I think it was in spring, the teacher said that they were no longer having that trip to Outer Joshua Tree because they considered that it wasn't educational. And so, yeah, right there, you know, it was shocking because it is, right? And to me, that was what got me really interested. Like, when I went back home, I was just so happy about the experiences that I had camping with my friends. And I remember rock climbing and my hands were swollen, but I still wanted to keep doing it. And so that's what I shared to them. And, you know, they're like, wow, I want to do that. And so, and to add to the question before, and I just remembered, so that time we had a lot of high school students that were interested in going to us. And I think that at that time we're going to go to Big Morongo Canyon Preserve, but we didn't have transportation. We only had a van that only would fit 11 students. So we got a list of students that were actually interested, but we couldn't invite them all. And so that was a challenge. And so if you said how you would support us, if you have the resources to help us out with that, that would be great because there was like 50 students that would want to have gone. But yeah, like I said, I think from personal experience, you share with them the work that you have done, you know, maybe from an internship. We actually had a student that started getting involved with COFEM through the other programs, but ended up being our intern, and now he's at Riverside City College, but he still likes to be involved. And so from there, you know, he's able to share that with other students and say, hey, look, this is what I've learned, and I've become an advocate. Yeah, and that's how you start getting them involved, little by little. You don't want to scare them off because I know when we did the presentation, it was just kind of brief. If we do too much, you're going to overwhelm them and might scare them off. So I think you just kind of give them that unique experience, give them a reason to stay engaged why they're there, and a goal later on, and I think you'll keep them engaged.
From a landscape perspective, I think that cultivating a connection to the landscape, that being plants, animals, is really important. So touching, seeing, experiencing the landscape in ways that maybe students haven't in the past is definitely a way to get their interest in conservation efforts.
Let's give a round of applause for this wonderful panel. We thank you for joining us today and kicking off our 50th anniversary celebratory year. A big thing that's going to, a big project for us will be a history book about MBCA that will be available in the spring, probably around the time of the Desert Wise Landscape Tour. And then next fall we will have another program, conservation. We're not sure exactly what yet, but this is such a seminal year for, or not a seminal year, but such a celebratory year, and we're very grateful for each and every one of you who came out and spent so much of this Saturday with us. So looks like there's still some beverages at the back, maybe even some cake or cookies. Enjoy your fellowship. We need to be out of here by 3, but you're welcome to, again, we appreciate your being here. Thanks so much.